Hello everyone, and welcome to another amazing story. What if Deku was a necromancer? This amazing story was written by Magnus9284. Please support them. Don't forget to like, sub, and leave a comment. Now let's dive in.
A sinister realization. With the resumption of classes at UA, Japan's most lauded schools for heroic education, the entirety of that year's Class 1B finally found themselves reunited. Unexpectedly, they found their first, much-anticipated heroics class since their return occurring at the entrance of Ground Gamma, instead of their classroom. The only hint Vlad King, their grizzled teacher, had given them? Special training. Needless to say, a majority of the class wasn't happy about this development. Special training? Nito Monoma, the blonde instigator and Class 1A hater, scoffed for the umpteenth time, more like pity treatment. The rather Aryan-looking teen in a tuxedo-like hero costume had been at it since the announcement had been made that morning. Sneering, snarking, and all-around grousing had been the blonde's general attitude since. It was frankly more annoying than anything at this point. However, if one were to look closely, hiding behind squinted sapphire eyes lay genuine hurt at once more having his class relegated to a mere second thought. "You're telling me?" Toguru Kamakiri, one of Class 1B's more unique students, griped in agreement. The tall and slender teen, while actually wielding a transformation quirk, had nonetheless been born with an appearance more in line with that of a mutation type. Bluntly speaking, the boy had the head of a fierce-looking insectoid, made all the more intimidating by how his shaggy green hair was styled into a mohawk. "We should be out there getting some real-life experience already." The loudly declared sentiment was met with a smattering of agreement from the rest of the class. Many of Class 1B shared the belief that they deserved a chance to shine just like their sister and rival Class 1A had been given at the USJ. Knock it off already. There were a few rebels, however, who stood against such brazen notions from their classmates. One, Class 1B's president in fact, was completely in opposition of the idea. "If Kan-sensei says we're not ready, then we aren't," Itsuka Kendo said, taking a stand at the front of her embittered class. Clad in her thigh-length, turquoise hero costume, reminiscent of a Chinese qipao, the fiery-haired young woman turned and eyed each member of 1B, taking as deep a breath as the black corset that accentuated her curves would allow. The martial artist continued to admonish the excitable teens before her. "We should be focusing on learning as much as we can, doing as much as we can, right now. That way, when the time comes, we too will be able to challenge and overcome adversity." The scattered nodding and positive murmurings disturbed the class president. There were far too many of her classmates who were still dead set on following Monoma and Kamakiri's path. Their stubbornness honestly irked the redhead. She'd had a chat with her counterpart from 1A as soon as she could after the USJ incident, and the horrors the Ravenet had recounted having to survive. It still brought a shiver to her spine. "While I agree with the wisdom of your words, Itsukanizan," a beast of a teen called out as he joined the conversation, "can you honestly say that you believe we of 1B do not stand on equal footing with our fellows of 1A? Immediately, Itsuka found her eye twitching at the sight of her furred classmate. Jirota Shishida, normally as gentlemanly of a scholar as one could ever hope to find, was currently half-naked in his hero costume. The redhead couldn't tell if it was her classmate's get-up of black jeans, sunglasses, and ridiculously singular shirt collar that had caused the involuntary muscle spasm, or the fact that one of her most stalwart backers had just agreed with Monoma. Seeing the look on his class president's face, Jirota raised his clawed hands in surrender. "I am not proposing that we should throw ourselves at real villains, of course," the beastly teen backtracked, a sweat drop somehow managing to remain visible as it made tracks down his face. "I merely suggest we should honestly consider the pro-et contra of submitting a proper petition for a more advanced training curricula." Realizing that the furred gentleman of 1B hadn't abandoned her camp entirely, Itsuka felt an unknown weight somewhat lift from her shoulders. That weight, however, came crashing back down as more and more of their classmates began to openly declare their own desires. The majority unfortunately seemed to land in the pro-adversity camp. It made the redhead's stomach drop. "I ready," shouted Pony Tsunotori with a fist bump. The bubbly blonde's broken Japanese betrayed her American heritage, although already she'd made great strides in improving her language skills. Now if only her classmates could stop Monoma from teaching the innocent girl obscenities to hurl at 1A. Itsuka still couldn't believe the slightly equine-looking teen could make for such an adorable image, especially with her interesting costume choice of a black buckled harness over a blue and white skirt. Maybe it was her big, sparkling Prussian blue eyes that just melted your heart? "We should ask for a joint practice." "Tetsu Tetsu Tetsu Tetsu," Class 1B's resident metal manly man, roared before pounding his fists together. Crossing his arms, the Sylvette glared at any who dared to look at him weirdly, which was no one, in a useless attempt to appear even manlier in his sleeveless green jumpsuit. At this point, Itsuka could feel a headache coming on. Why did her class have to be full of so many stubborn idiots? Raising a hand to make her point once again, the redhead was cut off before she could utter a word. I for one agree with Tetsu-san. Ibara Shiozaki, Class 1B's resident Christian, announced in her customary peaceful tone. The vine-haired young woman, who many agreed was cosplaying as a Roman or Grecian goddess with her pure white toga, took a measured step forward. The rowdy members of the class, those that had still been readying their own arguments, quieted. Itsuka felt the stirrings of hope that another voice of reason had joined the fray. If it is for the sake of shared knowledge and field experience, Ibara continued, raising Kendo's hopes even further. Finally, at least a sensible suggestion from this mob she called family. And if, by the grace of God, opportunities to lead certain enslaved souls to salvation happen to occur along the way, I would of course do my utmost best as a devout follower of our Lord to do so. Itsuka buried her face into her hands. Hadn't her classmates only days ago started an uncalled-for confrontation? What made them think they were in any way mature enough for advanced heroics when she couldn't even convince them in the following days to properly apologize to the victimized party? Their entire feud against one particular 1A student was irrational. Near the back of the 1B group, a little away from the others, one Kanoko Komori couldn't help but ignore her classmates as she sighed to herself like a girl who just experienced her first heartbreak. I wish I wasn't such a coward. Kanoko murmured to herself, bowed head allowing her long bangs to completely cover her eyes as she peered down at her too short mushroom-themed hero costume. Constantly pulling the wide, stiff hem of the red with white polka-dotted skirt down was becoming tiresome. Maybe then I'd be able to ask the support department for a better costume. The mushroom-themed girl was more than a little upset with whichever company had created the first rendition of her hero costume. Her dress was supposed to look cute, damn it, not sexy. She didn't want to give off the wrong impression to anyone she ran across while in the line of duty after all. It didn't help that her quirk was a bit on the creepy side if you asked her. Don't worry, Kanoko-chan, Reiko Yanagi, Komori's best friend in 1B, assured through her black face mask, you can always do so next time. Although the Sylvette spoke in monotone, her mushroom-themed friend knew she truly did care about her troubles, even if she didn't quite understand them. After all, the wielder of the poltergeist quirk had confided in her that she'd intended for her thigh-length white kimono, with its crimson furred collar, to stand out. The outfit was apparently meant to be sexy, but sensible. Kanoko thought some people took the whole quirk theme a bit far if you asked her. The mushroom girl sighed, sneaking a look at the still unraveling situation at the front of 1B. Her costume issue paled in comparison to the guilt she felt for being responsible for triggering the feud that was tearing her class apart in the first place. All she'd wanted to do was say hello to a certain Verdinet, see if he maybe still remembered her. Ask forgiveness for being such a coward for all these years. Enough with the chatter. The roar instantly froze each and every member of 1B in their tracks, regardless of whether or not they had been participating in the feud's latest manifestation. Vlad King, the rough-and-tumble teacher of 1B, had finally arrived. And the grizzled man was not happy to find his class bickering like, well, schoolchildren. The frown that pulled at the pro's lips at the sight of their lax behavior forced his exaggerated underbite even further forward, his two lower canine gleaming. All right, the tusked man grunted when he realized his class was paying him their complete attention. Form up. 2 lines. Follow me. In only moments, Kendo had divided her classmates evenly into formation. Leading the way behind their sensei, the redhead couldn't help but feel that the muscular man who'd been their rock at UA wore a far too serious look upon his face. And that was saying something when one spoke of Sekijiro-kan. As you heard earlier, today's training is special. The blood hero paused, eyeing the titan looks many of his knucklehead students pulled at his words. Or perhaps, different would be a better way of putting it. The goal is to provide you with experience closer in nature to what the field of heroics will be like in the real world. The pro-hero picked up on every eye roll and sigh of annoyance at his announcement, even before he turned around. The Sylvette felt his blood begin to boil. Just remember, you all asked for something like this. So, Vlad King trailed off. As the closest one to their sensei, only Kendo witnessed the pro's visage darken, giving the man a look of internal conflict on. A knot of worry began to take root in the redhead's stomach. Before she could question her teacher, the man pressed on. Listen. A crucial part of heroics, out there in the real world, is developing the ability to pick up on clues on the fly. If you can't learn to differentiate between what appears to be happening and what truly is, then you'll only make yourself and those around you easy pickings for the worst sort of villains. The serious and grave tone of the declaration successfully magnetized the attention of the entirety of Class 1B. A number of the students looked back at their sensei, grateful for the wisdom passed unto them. Others appeared to have delved into their own thoughts, turning the words over again and again, looking for meaning. "Let's go," the blood hero said, quick to switch gears. Turning back around, the muscular man wasted no time in resuming his march. There's no time to waste. A lot of effort was put into making this training session one you'll never forget. In no time at all, Class 1B had traversed a large part of the test site, arriving at the central main street. Nodding his head as if satisfied, Vlad King turned around once more, this time without missing a beat. Walking backwards, the pro continued to walk with supreme confidence in his every step. "You will first be separated into groups, and then dropped into random locations," the Sylvette said without further preamble. "All teams have only 2 objectives to fulfill to pass. Find a hostage, and secure a superweapon." Several nods came from across the following students. This was exactly the kind of scenario that 1B had expected, nothing surprising, or especially taxing. "There's a catch of course," Vlad King continued, "you'll all be harassed by foe villains. Significant damage inflicted by these opponents will be considered lethal, while conversely you will only be allowed to employ countermeasures to capture or neutralize them." Again, many of 1B were disgruntled with these rather simple parameters. Sure, the inclusion of foe villains in an exercise would be a new twist for them, but it was probably only UA's attempt at making 1A's experience at the USJ appear less advantageous for their rivals. This was hardly even a slight upgrade to their previous training sessions. These and other detrimental assumptions caused many of 1B to immediately begin ignoring their sensei's explanation, most only hearing the part about hostages and super weapons before tuning out completely. They just ask for the full lecture again once they reach the test starting point. No problem. Reaching the facsimile of a major intersection, Class 1B arrived at a raised platform in the middle of the road. Resting on the large dais was a large cylindrical mechanism, 2 large machine claws capping either end. Wearing a coloration of black with yellow stripes, it was obvious to the heroes in training that this was their super weapon, a bomb of some kind. A biohazard symbol sat prominently on the weapon's front, a nice touch but ultimately boring. Was it too much to ask for a giant mechadinosaur with rocket launchers or something? "Your students don't seem too enthused, Kansan," a husky, rather seductive voice drawled from behind the weapon. The click of heels heralded the arrival of a pro-hero every male of 1B instantly recognized, the unmistakably sexy R-rated heroine, Midnight. "Hopefully I'll be able to fire them up. Nothing like a vigorous workout, right?" Cracking her whip, the sensual heroine licked her lips as she descended the stage. The sight alone seemed to lift the spirit of the gathered students, well, the males at least. From her place at the front of one of the lines, Kendo quickly went to work analyzing this new development. If Midnight was going to be present, then she was probably going to be playing the part of their foe villain. This training had just gotten a lot more intense than any of their previous sessions in less than a minute. "I would be grateful if you did," Vlad King groused, seeming to agree with his salacious coworker. "These runts have been begging for this for weeks now. I would be disappointed if they suddenly decided to back out now. Or not take this seriously." Belatedly realizing this was a jab at them, certain members of 1B failed to react in time before more arrivals to the intersection appeared. "Yo Kansan!" came the cheerful shout of Power Loader, the head of UA's support department. The short redhead encased in excavation gear walked up to those already gathered flanked by Hound Dog, UA's lifestyle guidance counselor, and a pinkette wearing a seemingly custom-built helmet and goggles that screamed steampunk. "We would have been here sooner, but Hatsum here had to run some last-minute calibrations on our super weapon. But, no worries, the citywide gauntlet has been finished now." Sashaying back up the stage to stand beside the weapon, Midnight waved her whip at the device with a satisfied look on her face. "That's great, Maijima-san. I was wondering what this was supposed to do," the R-rated heroine said, gathering steam as she spoke. "Now, I think a quick rundown will help us excite Class 1B, don't you think?" Unable to contain all of their disappointment at correctly guessing the nature of the mechanism on the dais, most of heroic students present rolled their eyes with barely suppressed groans. "You'll love it," chimed in the pinkette Power Loader had called Hatsum. Excitement and pride filled the energetic support student's voice as she literally vibrated in place. "We loaded the Mecharex with all kinds of babies, guns, laser turrets, heat-seeking missile launchers." The entirety of Class 1B, including their sensei, watched on in confusion as Hatsum pulled a remote from somewhere and pressed a series of buttons too quickly to follow. An ear-splitting metallic screeching ripped through the air as a mechanical monstrosity stepped out from behind one of the towering faux plants that littered Ground Gamma. The metal beast looked every bit as badass as advertised, its exterior bristling with so much weaponry it would have been intimidating even just standing still. It was everything the frustrated younglings of 1B had wanted. So that begged the question, why add a bomb? Perplexed at the additional firepower, Midnight glanced from the giant Mecharex to the towering bomb next to her on the dais. Puzzlement furrowed the heroine's normally enticingly masked visage. Catching on to the source of his coworker's confusion, Power Loader slapped a hand over his face in exasperation. Hatsum. The excavation hero groaned, annoyance clear in the pro's voice. What have I said about leaving your crazy inventions laying about in the test sites? The reprimand brought sighs of relief and feelings of ease. No need to think too hard on the anomaly if it was just a case of laziness delaying cleanup. But that baby isn't mine. Hatsum whined, quick to defend herself. Those few who'd already been exposed to the girl, teacher and student alike, tensed. There was no way the Pinkette would ever deny ownership of one of her inventions, or truly leave it just lying around outside of her lab unsupervised. Power Loader crossed his arms, the uncharacteristic crossness instantly reminding Class 1B how strict the support department head was when it came to equipment safety, especially when other people were involved. Then whose is it? The agitated excavation hero asked. Hatsum and Class 1B stared at their sensei, before starting when the older inventor cleared his throat in obvious expectation. Oh! Hatsum shouted, suddenly strangely happy. I'll go check. The Pinkette skipped over to the dais and eager hopped aboard, brushing by Midnight as if the pro wasn't even there. The seductive heroine might have been insulted had she not been warned about the young woman's obsession with inventing. The chance to tear apart someone else's creation without the threat of reprimand must have been a special treat for her. I apologize for this, Power Loader said, bowing slightly to his muscular coworker. If nothing else, the excavation hero was a true gentleman, and believed in accepting what shame he believed his suggested oversight had caused. Likewise, Vlad King was also a man of manners, when he wished to be, and easily offered his friend a kind response. Don't worry about it, the blood hero replied, waving a dismissive hand at the device being poked and prodded by the overeager Hatsum girl. It's not like it's consuming too much of our time. Having been standing around doing nothing but observing the back and forth going on around them, Class 1B finally reached the end of their patience and began to impatiently whisper amongst themselves. Luckily for them, their sensei couldn't be bothered to parcel out the many low-toned conversations going on. At the dais, Hatsum abruptly managed to jimmy open a panel on the side of the mysterious device. Instead of an accomplished bellow of triumph, the Pinkette let out a startled yelp at what she found inside. Oh? Sensei? Sensei? Hatsum's uncharacteristically panicked shout instantly drew the attention of all present. Power Loader whipped around from where he'd been speaking to Vlad King. Trying and failing to keep her face passive, the singular support student attempted to whisper her next words. It's a real bomb. Needless to say, subtly had never been Hatsum's strong suit. Everyone present heard her loud and clear. Not even a second later, the pro heroes leapt into action. Vlad! Midnight! Get the other students to safety! Power Loader shouted, first to take charge. The two other pros swiftly agreed that the excavation hero should take the leadership role. This sudden situation was closer to his ballpark than theirs. Hatsum! Don't move! Power Loader's celerity was all for naught, however. Before either of the UA staff could get a single member of Class 1B to break from their shock at the sudden turn of events, the mechanic cylinder hitherto resting innocuously upon the dais powered on without a sound. Ominous red lines bled from either end of the device, up and down drawing thin trails of sharp edges and shapes. When the lines met in the middle there was a single pause. With a muted hiss, the cylinder shot out open 8 circumferric pipes. Immediately, pink mist began to billow outward from the metal tubes, expanding alarmingly quickly. Neither pro nor student was able to even scream or shout in surprise before the entirety of the intersection they'd been standing in was completely enveloped by the rosy fog. The sound of bodies collapsing to the ground echoed throughout the square for a few moments as, without even the hint of a struggle, those gathered blacked out. Undetermined time later, location unknown? Ugh? Itsuka woke with a slight headache, her groggy vision blurring her surroundings. Blinking rapidly, the redhead was soon able to make out the walls of whatever room she'd woken up in. They looked to be those of one of UA's generic testing site buildings. At the very least, she hadn't been kidnapped off of school grounds. What happened? Groans and murmuring were the only answer to the class president's question. Forcing herself to sit up, Itsuka turned to the side, catching sight of Kanoko and Reiko. The two girls looked just as disoriented and out of it as she felt. Off on the other side of the room, Yosetsu Uwais and Juzo Hananuki seemed to be having trouble coming to completely. Juzo had managed to lose his helmet. Is everyone all right? Itsuka asked loudly, instinctively taking as much control of the situation as she could as she pushed herself to stand up. It was slow going, but soon enough the other 4 heroes in training gave affirmatives as they shakily got to their own feet. Allowing her friends a few more moments to gather themselves, Itsuka began to think on their new situation. She'd been first in her line, and had had one of the front row seats to the unsuspected bomb's activation. So what had she seen, and how could that help her keep herself and her classmates safe? It was clear to Itsuka that they'd been gassed, the redhead assuming the mist had been a strong tranquilizer or narcotic agent. Once unconscious, their attacker or attackers had clearly moved them. The class president's headache grew more prominent as the worst question possible reared its ugly head. Why? What was the motive of whoever had attacked them? Shaking her head, Itsuka took in the room she'd woken up in. To her surprise, upon closer inspection, she and her group weren't actually in a room, but one of the central halls of a testing building. Class 1B had used one before in their first battle trial. The familiarity did little to assuage the redhead's nerves. There was no indication as to what floor they'd been left on, nor which of the many buildings of ground gamma they'd been deposited in. Just as Itsuka decided to ask her companions for their thoughts, an unfamiliar whirring sound began to echo through the hall, its source slowly approaching. From around the corner floated a drone. One look at the flying robot and the 5 heroes in training almost simultaneously felt ill enough for their stomachs to literally clench. How could a simple machine strike such fear into the hearts of Itsuka and her friends? The drone's body was a metallic facsimile of a skull. One of its eye sockets was stuffed with a small, red glowing lens, giving it the appearance of staring forward. Which would make sense, given that the lens was most likely for a camera used to guide the machine's movements. The other eye socket was also taken, this one by an even larger lens encircled by a focus ring. The drone rotated in place, its glowing eye and black eye staring down the 5 students who'd by now slipped into guarded stances. Taking them in, the drone shifted in the air again, silently, and pointed its face toward one of the hall's empty walls. A different type of whirring purred into existence, and then with a click, the drone's larger eye began to project an image onto the wall. Itsuka felt her stomach drop to her feet and ice take root in her veins. What stared back at her and her classmates was a disconcerting and frightening sight to be sure. Donning what looked to be a yellow trench coat with its hood raised, a humanoid figure greeted them. Instead of a normal face, the unknown wore a full iron mask that followed his facial features, only angular to the point of being minimalistic. The disguise seemed to gaze outward with a judgmental mien. To complete the intimidating look, soulless black lenses prevented any chance of getting a read on the man or woman staring back at them. Salutations, students of UA. The voice that issued forth from the drone was highly synthesized and heavily accented. It was level and clear, almost somber. Just the same, the clearly foreign villain's simple greeting caused a shiver of fear to rack the 5 heroes in training. You may call me Osoiek, and I want to play a game. Mind racing, Itsuka immediately filed the name away in her head. Unfortunately, the redhead couldn't recall the image before her matching any villain shown on the national database. She didn't even try to place the voice. Your capture was meant to lure all might to me, Osoiek continued, adding alarm and anxiety to the 1B students' already growing confusion and fear. What kind of idiot intentionally provoked the symbol of peace? Fortunately for you, the fool hasn't graced us with his presence yet. Itsuka could barely keep herself from collapsing. This was it. This was exactly like what had happened at the USJ. It had taken an entire afternoon of girl talk, but Momo had eventually revealed exactly what the purpose of the invasion had been. The frozen redhead felt her throat close up. The bad feeling she'd had since waking up had just gotten a hell of a lot worse. Why had this psycho said, fortunately? While I wait, I've decided to give myself a bit of entertainment, the foreign villain revealed, neutral as ever. You each have a chance to save your teachers, and the extra. As soon as the drone finished relating the announcement, the image it projected changed. What was once a singular figure cut to a split-screen view of the pro heroes who'd been with Class 1B earlier, and handsome, tied to chairs by chains. Each beaten and battered captive looked far worse for wear, to the point they appeared ill. To be sporting, I divided you all into groups of 5, Osoiek said, unintentionally sending waves of relief rocking through Itsuka's body. She now knew her classmates, her responsibility as their class president, were alive. For now. The game is simple. Find a hostage and liberate them. That is the only way not to die. Itsuka felt her heart stop. From the corner of her eye, she saw Reiko move to support Kanoko, who'd almost collapsed. Yosetsu and Juzo had paled so much they both appeared as if they'd never even heard of the sun. This couldn't be happening. Of course, quitting isn't an option. The obviously insane villain trailed off, the silence building an ominous suspense. Any attempt to do so will result in the complete elimination of all players. Hostages included. Whatever relief Itsuka had felt at learning of her classmates' survival died a final death as the enormity of the situation crashed down upon her. This villain, from out of nowhere, had just declared with complete solemnity that he intended to kill them. And then the class president's subconscious completed a terrible bit of math and forced it to the forefront of her mind. There were 5 hostages. There were only 4 groups of students. Now my new little Mishi. The presence of the unfamiliar term did little to hide the slight uptick it was said with. Whatever the word had been, Osoiek had smiled while saying it. Meet your Cody. Itsuka had thought her blood couldn't freeze any further, but what appeared on the drone's projection next chilled her to her bones. Her classmates' gasps and dry heaving indicated they felt the same. Nevesta. Painted upon the wall in splashes of light was the slender figure of a woman wrapped in a pitch-black diver suit. Instead of a regulator and mask, the villainess wore a skull face mask with an opening carved into it where her mouth would be. But what horrified the members of Class 1B the most wasn't what the woman was dressed in, but who was with her. Sprawled out at the feet of the villainess, held up by the hair in the woman's cruel grip, laid a feminine teen dressed in gothic rocker attire with elongated earlobes. She'd been beaten so badly her face was barely recognizable, and there was far too much blood covering her. Itsuka belatedly realized the unmoving girl was a member of Class 1A. And then the redhead finally comprehended the fact that the gothic rocker's stomach had been sliced open, and her intestines were leaking out of a gaping wound. Rosalie. The projection changed before Itsuka could even whimper at the reality of the last image. Now, the scene before the distraught 1B members was focused on a tall and lithe villain who was clad in an oversized yellow raincoat, hood raised. Covered as they were, it was impossible to discern if this new antagonist was male or female, and the now familiar skull-shaped mask only added to that difficulty. The nondescript villain had their arms raised, strangling a twitching figure held off the ground with their head out of frame. From what little Itsuka could see, the victim, dressed in green with long dark hair, appeared to have feminine curves and frog-like feet. The impossibly long tongue, limply hanging down into the shot from above, left no question in the redhead's mind. It was another member of Class 1A. Pesnia. Again, the scene changed. And again, Itsuka and her group were exposed to a terrible sight. This time, the villain, while dressed the same as the last, was much smaller, appearing to be a midget of some type. This one stood before a giant metal barrel, filled with bubbling acid. There was an arm sticking out of the dissolving solution, imploring for rescue that would never come. Sela. Another change of scene, and another villain dressed in genderless garb and mask appeared. The new villain stood atop a teen with the head of a raven, wielding a metal pipe that was jabbed into the male. The boy's feathers were smoking, and he appeared to be in the middle of a seizure. But the attack looked wrong, as if the writhing body wasn't moving as a body attempting to resist forced movement would. It was as if the raven-headed teen, another member of 1A Itsuka noted, was already dead. The class president of 1B heard someone, Owaze or Juzo, begin to vomit behind her, but she couldn't bear to turn away from the sight before her. The reality of their situation was crashing down upon the 5 heroes in training with brutal force. They were facing off against murderers. Murderers who'd already taken out some of Class 1A, the ones everyone said were so strong. The ones who'd survived a full-on villain assault on the USJ. Do try and entertain my Tavarashi, Osoiek said, the projection cutting back to the villain's expressionless, masked appearance. You have until All Might arrives. Das Vidania. Abruptly, the projection cut off, drowning the hall in darkness after such prolonged lighting. In the shadowed gloom, Itsuka stared wide-eyed at the drone, which continued to stare impassively at her and her friends. Feeling a spark of sudden fury, the redhead activated her quirk and smashed the machine. It was only after she was wiping scrap off her hands that Itsuka cooled down enough to realize she'd also managed to keep the drone from transmitting their location back to their pursuers. Small victories. What did he mean BBB by THTH that? Kanoko stuttered out pitifully into the dark, the mushroom girl's nerves completely shot after everything she'd just witnessed. The sudden change, the sudden danger, it was almost too much for her. What happens when All Might A arrives? Itsuka and Juzo, who'd apparently not been the one who'd vomited behind her, as Yosetsu was still wiping his mouth in the corner, exchanged glances. Silently, the class president and recommendation student came to an agreement. We need to move. Juzo's ability to pack his sheer determination and courage into that simple statement did a good job at displaying one of the many reasons why the macabrely grinning teen had been offered his recommendation. His calm demeanor, no matter how thin it truly was, allowed Yosetsu and Kanoko to breathe just a little easier. Right, Itsuka agreed, tone commanding and sharp enough to instantly set her as the leader of the group. Her natural charisma and apparent of wisdom has always made it easier for members of Class 1B to follow her plans. First, we need to reorient ourselves. I think we're still in ground gamma, but where exactly is what we need to know. Pausing a moment, the redhead looked at each of her classmates, ensuring that each one agreed with her course of action. Receiving 4 silent nods, she continued. Let's get to the roof, Itsuka proposed, tone instilling the suggestion as a command. From there we can decide what to do, and where to go. As the group moved, quickly coming to a stairwell, Kanoko didn't fail to notice her question had been completely ignored. So, to herself, the mushroom girl answered. When All Might arrived, they would all be saved. Right? On guard every step of the way, the group of 5 slowly made their way up each floor of the building. Every corner, every shadow had become suspicious, a place for ambush, and more than once they found themselves with their hearts catching in their throats as strange noises echoed through the empty halls. After 10 flights of stairs, and 3 times longer than it had taken during the battle trial, Itsuka's group managed to reach the roof. Opening that last metal latch and pushing the door open, the 5 heroes in training actually felt like they'd managed to accomplish something. We made it! Yosetsu nearly shouted, barely keeping it to a whisper under threat of being heard by the villains hunting them. Unimpressed with his classmates' overreaction to merely getting outside, Juzo carefully stepped over to the edge of the roof. Peering out, the softening user turned his gaze toward the direction of Ground Gamma's entrance. Yosetsu-san, Itsuka said, causing the active teen to straighten up stiffly, keep an eye on the door. If you even think you hear something, scream. Limiting himself to a mock salute, the Ravenet took his station. Satisfied, the class president walked over and stood beside the recommendation student. Left without orders, Reiko and Kanoko took up positions on another side of the roof, taking in the surrounding area in hopes of finding traces of their fellow classmates, or a route to safety. So, what do you think? Itsuka asked lowly, glancing at Juzo. Even with mostly frozen facial features, the grinning teen managed to pull a worried expression. Something isn't right, Juzo answered, just as hushed. It was clear to him that Itsuka didn't want to worry the others if at all possible. This all seems too elaborate. That Osoiek guy had us, all of us, but then lets us go so he can toy with us. Itsuka shrugged. She'd had similar thoughts while they trekked up the stairs. And since he's the one who placed us here, he knows where we are. How's that hunting? Juzo raised another good point. As they spoke, something began to buzz at the back of Itsuka's mind. She was missing something. They both were. Her companion crossed his arms as he pushed on. If you're going to go through the effort, why not change the setting? Or have his subordinates there when we woke up to start the chase immediately? Logic dictated that there had to be some reason for a villain as obviously intelligent, but clearly deranged, as Osoiek to have done things the way he had. He'd shown himself to be clever enough to cover his voice and face. Hell, they didn't even know if the psycho really was a man outside of the deepened pitch of his voice, so what was the point of this hunt? And why use a drone to... As the words trailed from her mouth, Itsuka was struck in the heart by a horrifying realization. Whirling, the redhead grabbed onto Juzo as she felt her legs nearly give out from under her. The grinning teen grabbed onto his class president without question and offered his support. He'd come to the same conclusion she had. Juzo-san. I think. Itsuka started, we're being recorded. To lure out All Might? Juzo finished, nodding solemnly. Thud. Ayaha. The sudden noise, followed by Kanoko's terrified scream, caused the 2 high-caliber students to snap around. They immediately wished they hadn't. Yosetsu, once standing by the doorway to the stairwell, was now laying on the ground, unmoving in a growing pool of liquid crimson. Over their downed classmate, masked face blank, stood the villainous Nevesta. The woman still had her arm out, blade in hand stained red. Reality crashed into Itsuka's whirling thoughts, devastating the redhead beyond belief. Nausea and despair gripped her, threatening to drown her as the class president finally realized how terribly true their homeroom teacher's words had been. They weren't ready for this. They were just easy pickings. The villainess tilted her head to the side silently, mockingly acting as if she were confused by their reactions to the sight of their murdered classmate. The sight lit a fire in Itsuka's belly, the ice in her veins melting enough that she was able to temporarily push down her despair and slide into a combat stance. The redhead swore to herself that she'd avenge her fallen friend, and protect the ones who were still with her. A single step. That's all Itsuka managed before Juzo threw his arm out to block her path. Class president. Take Kanoko-san and Rei-chan, the recommendation student said, grim determination settling over his shoulders. You 3 need to get out of here. But. Kanoko tried to object, but couldn't force the words out. He lied, Itsuka said, hating that she had to shatter the mushroom girl's threadbare hopes. Osoiek never intended to let us go. They're going to kill us anyway. Kanoko sobbed, burying her face into Reiko's bosom. The expressionless Sylvette inhaled sharply, but otherwise refrained from acting besides wrapping her arms around her distraught friend. The still silent villainess took a step forward, seeming to understand what the students had just said. Reacting instantly, Juzo slammed his hands onto the rooftop and pushed everything he could into his quirk. Part of the roof transmuted into a semi-solid state, sinking inward almost immediately afterward. The result created an oblong hole in the process that stretched all the way to the encroaching villainess and split the roof in two. "Run!" Juzo shouted, even as he almost collapsed from overstressing his quirk. The grinning teen had never pushed softening so hard before, or tried to force it to completely collapse what he was using it on. But he'd done it. Even as he heaved for breath, the fledgling mudman heard the girls as they passed by him and jumped from their roof to the next building over. They'd escaped. Juzo stood, trying not to shake as he took in his opponent. He knew the villainess probably beat him in experience. The way she moved, stalking him, almost screamed that the woman wasn't new to this type of fight. As she leapt back to avoid the reach of his softening, the hero in training thought he might be able to buy his classmates a few minutes if he focused on keeping the huntress stuck in one spot. Then Nevesta pulled a gun, and Juzo realized this wasn't going to be a fair fight. Same time, another unknown location. Kurwaro San. As the seconds ticked by, and her black-themed classmates still failed to return to them, Shiozaki felt her soul grow heavier and heavier with remorse and guilt. She'd been the one to suggest their group's present course of action after all. But sending their classmate, whose quirk allowed him the ability to merge with anything black-colored, had seemed like a good idea at the time. There'd been an abundant number of shadows in the dilapidated parking structure they'd woken up in, more than enough to provide their classmate with multiple options for a tactical retreat in the event he was somehow discovered by the villains hunting them. He should have been fine. But now Shiozaki couldn't help but wonder, in a dark corner of her mind, if the villains had prepared counters for their quirks. And maybe he found a way out? Shota, often referred to as Class 1B's conscience, asked. The blueonette was turtling hard into the high collar of his hero costume, more than a little nervous about the situation he and his class found themselves in. A beastly scoff to the plump boy's side announced what the tallest member of their little group thought of such an idea. "Are you perhaps suggesting Kurwaro-san ran away?" Shishida asked, his deep voice carrying more concern than honest annoyance. "Do you honestly believe a hero in training would abandon their comrades like that?" It was an ugly thought, Shiozaki agreed, but it was a possibility. They were suddenly facing unknown villains, who strove toward terrible motives, and appeared to carry a real drive to murder them all. Despite Osoiek's threat, the notion of escaping the madman's game would have been an all-too-sweet song for anyone not to consider. She had, however briefly. And no. Shota denied quickly, voice vacillating between fear and hope, but if he saw a chance to get help from the outside, then it would have been the best course of action if he'd taken it. Yes, Shiozaki returned to the conversation. If Kurwaro-san did indeed attempt an escape, let us pray he was successful in his endeavor. Her companions nodded, putting their hopes into her words. The vine-haired teen sighed, continuing forward. When they'd first woken up after the attack, Shiozaki had taken up the role of team leader, a position she'd dreamed of since she'd left the orphanage, moved to the church, and first learned what heroes were. It was a cruelty in the extreme that she couldn't enjoy her accomplishment in the current crisis though. Shiozaki wished with every fiber in her being that Kendone had been separated with them. "Kuro will be successful, don't worry guys." The sudden supportive cheer of Manga Fukudashi was clearly the teen's attempt at raising the spirits of his teammates. Besides, with his quirk, it's impossible for villains to get a hold of him. Hearing it said out loud somehow made the idea of Kurwaro's invulnerability more believable. One last time, the members of Shiozaki's group nodded at the assertion that their classmate was fine and on the way back to them. The black-themed teen not only had the best chances of escaping pursuit, but also the best defense against being captured. He would be fine. "Of course, you are right Fukudashi-san," Shiozaki agreed, joining the effort to brighten the mood. The group turned one last corner, the last incline to exit the parking structure. After all, how could anyone catch, let alone kill? It should have been impossible. Words died in the throats of the heroes in training as they took in the sight that awaited them at the gates of what should have been their salvation. Kurwaro was hanging down from the ceiling above the entrance, a thickly insulated electrical cable wrapped around his neck. The black-themed teen wasn't moving. Shock numbing their minds, and the three teens could do nothing but stare dumbly at their murdered classmate. This reality couldn't be true. Kurwaro couldn't be dead. Stomachs churned, knees weakened, and hearts rocketed into songs of fight or flight. It took over a minute before any of them could find their voices. And no, what? Shiozaki's lost any remaining hint of calm facade, beginning to crack under the weight of their discovery. How? She hadn't wanted this. Kendone could have the leadership role forever. She no longer wished to carry this burden. She'd had someone's life riding on her shoulders, her decisions, and her orders had led to that life being extinguished. Shiozaki nearly retched. She might as well have committed the murder herself. She had sinned. She had terribly, horribly sinned. Shiozaki-san. Shiozaki-san. Ibh-chan, calm down. Shishida's roar, harsh though it may have been, came with gentle arms wrapping around the plant-themed heroine in training. There is no time to mourn our friend right now. We must away from here. And quickly. The beastly teen, whose glasses were fogging due to the tears spilling from his eyes, was correct. Releasing his temporary team leader, Shishida glanced over to a trembling Fukudashi. Fukudashi-san, please lend me your aid in getting Kurwaro-san down. Still twitching, the comic teen quickly moved to assist. While the two stepped away to complete their grisly task, promising to be as respectful as possible, the beastly teen hoped their leader would take the time to gather herself. I don't understand. Manga muttered, his speech bubble-wobbly. How could they have gotten him? Him. Slowing to a stop before their hanged classmate, both teen realized neither had the fortitude to actually touch the corpse. Hey Shota-san, what do you think? Fukudashi asked. The silence that answered was strange. Normally their big-boned classmate was quick to respond to anyone who asked him something. Shota-san? Snap. Shiozaki, Shishida, and Fukudashi whipped around at the sudden, impossibly loud and sickening sound. Collectively, they gasped in horror. Rosalie, the tall monstrous villain clad in a yellow raincoat and skull mask, the one who they'd seen strangling a member of Class 1A only a short while ago, had found them. The source of the snap was easy to discern, as nauseating as it was. Their heavy-set classmate, poor Shota, hung, limply, from the villain's raised arms like a sack of flesh. It was abundantly clear to the remaining heroes in training, they'd just lost another classmate. They hadn't even had a chance to save him. Was this the villain that had taken down Kurwaro? Run! Shiozaki's scream echoed through the parking structure. It wasn't the most heroic option, but in the moment, her classmates obliged her orders without question. Scrambling back the way they'd come, the three remaining heroes in training descended back into the depths of the parking structure. It was the worst path they could have taken, but panic had clouded their judgment. Realizing this, Shishida took a chance, a sudden, desperate idea popping into his panicking thoughts. With a roar packed with impotent rage and rising terror, the beastly teen reared back a fist and let it fly. Crash! The innocent wall crumbled, and by the grace of some watching deity, it wasn't more brick or rebar that was revealed, but hallway. Shishida had found them a new escape route. As they fled down the newly discovered hallway and their minds had a chance to settle, the cowardice of their retreat began to gnaw at the egos of the heroes in training. Finally reaching an intersection, the group chose a room off to the side that had a door with a lock, and took a moment to catch their breath. Nervously, Fukudashi glanced back the way they'd come. Seeing nothing, he glanced back again. What the comic teen had seen as he and his group had taken the discovered hallway was burned into his mind, and it made resting impossible. And if the others had seen it, he knew they'd be in the same boat as he was now. As they'd left the parking structure behind, the monstrous Rosalie had dropped Shota's corpse like it was nothing. Without missing a beat, the villain had then simply started walking after them. The image would forever be burned into the back of Fukudashi's eyes. Meanwhile, another unknown location. The group that had originally consisted of Nito Monoma, Setsuna Tokage, Senkaibara, Yui Kodai, and Toguru Kamakiri had split. While on paper it was a fundamentally terrible idea, to them their reasoning had been somewhat sound. The math just hadn't added up. 4 teams, 5 hostages. If every team could only take one hostage, that meant one would be left as sacrifice. And that just wasn't heroic. Osoiek had never said anything about further dividing teams, so Monoma and Tokage had come to the conclusion that separating was allowed. At the request of the blonde egoist himself, the lizard-loving teen had taken both Kaibara and Kodai with her, leaving only their insectoid classmate behind. She'd wanted to fight the decision, but Kamakiri had brusquely told her to butt out and get lost. So she had. It was a tactical decision on Monoma's part. The hater of Class 1A was certain that a recommendation student would be able to make much better use of the other's quirks in a fight. He hated to say it, but mid-battle strategy was one of his weaker skills. He was much more adept at stealth, quick strikes, and misdirection. Call him a coward, but Monoma saw himself as a cunning coward who wanted his classmates to have the best chance of succeeding, and surviving, as possible. Now, the blonde and his aggressive classmate were doing their level best to scout the building they'd just entered. As luck would have it, the front gate of the structure had still been lowering back down when they'd come upon it, indicating recent use. Their advance proceeded relatively quickly. Kamakiri was quick with his step, and kept his eyes peeled for enemies. Monoma, likewise, kept a discerning eye on the lookout for positions of possible ambush. Whenever a mezzanine or atrium appeared overly suspicious or dangerous, the blonde would tap his classmate's shoulder and the two would progress much more cautiously until the area was cleared. Taking a left at the latest intersection they'd come across, the duo suddenly found themselves in a most convenient of positions. The midget. Kamakiri's whisper fell like leaves in the wind as he peeked around the corner. Bending his arms, large blades grew from the insectoid teen's forearms as he activated his quirk. "What's that villain doing?" Monoma whispered back, taking a peek himself. The blonde gently placed a hand on his classmate's shoulder, copying razor-sharp as the two had previously agreed. The diminutive villain, Pesnia, appeared to be completely engrossed in the laptop resting on the desk they sat at. While neither student could discern what was being typed, or watched, they both knew that if they could capture the villain, they had a chance at turning this whole nightmare around. Information was the maker or breaker of war, and while killing the villain was almost too tempting, Monoma wanted to teach these scum a lesson. "Don't mess with Class 1B. We have to strike to kill," Kamakiri hissed, eyes hardening as he continued to watch their target like a hawk. Monoma started. The blonde almost instinctively objected, but then realized he was in no position to do so. Even if they beat Pesnia into submission, they had no capture tool, or time or talent to interrogate the villain. So much for the pen being mightier than the sword. "I'll charge first," Kamakiri said, slipping back and turning to face Monoma. "You jump in a second later, in case that bastard somehow dodges my attack." Monoma gulped, but nodded in understanding just the same. Just because he'd come to accept that killing the villain was likely their only option, that didn't mean the blonde's stomach had come to accept the same without twisting and churning. "Don't strike to kill," Kamakiri added suddenly, taking in his partner's growing pallor. "All you need to do is corner the villain. Or serve as a distraction. I'll carry the heavier burden." With that unpleasantness settled, both teens agreed that now was the time to act. Monoma stood at the ready by the corner. Kamakiri crouched. In a flurry of motion, the insectoid teen leapt forward, charging around the corner as silently as the predator he resembled. Monoma swung around the corner a second later, calculating that his companion was a single step from their target. Readying his borrowed razor sharp, the blonde clenched his gut in. "G-G-G-G-G-G-H-H-H-H-A-A-A-A-A." Kamakiri's scream brought Monoma up short. The blonde stared in fascinated horror. They'd made a rookie mistake. In their rush to defeat their target, they'd forgotten to check the room for traps. A wire net on the floor, connected to an electrical outlet, had stopped the insectoid hero in training in his tracks. And now he was being electrocuted without mercy. "Kamakiri!" Monoma shouted, only succeeding in drawing the attention of Pesnia from the laptop. The diminutive villain rose from their seat, smoothly drawing a gun with a silencer attached from a holster strapped to their chest, under the raincoat. Suddenly, the electrified trap shut off, allowing its victim to collapse to the ground like a lifeless doll. Without a word of warning, Pesnia took aim and fired 3 shots into the unmoving body. If he'd been able to move his body at all, Monoma knew he would have run. He should have run. Why wasn't he running? Too late, the blonde lifted his gaze to glare at the villain who'd murdered yet another student of his class. Staring into the soulless lenses of the skull-like mask, the copy user saw only his own reflection. There was no remorse. No mercy. Slowly, the outfoxed student raised his arms, a clear sign of surrender. He'd been beaten. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. 1B was supposed to be able to. Still without saying a word, Pesnia pulled out another gun, also silenced, and shot the blonde without missing a beat. Itsuka Kendo's group, unknown location. When Itsuka, Kanoko, and Reiko had jumped to the roof of the building next to them, the three hadn't expected the flooring to be so thin and frail. The shoddy construction collapsing from under them as soon as they'd landed had also been unexpected. At least they'd managed to land in a pool, for that they were grateful. Not so much that the pool's water turned out to be murky in nature. "Gah!" Kanoko cried as she surfaced, coughing up a mouthful of dirty water. The brunette bit back a curse as she realized her costume was now beyond saving. Why would they keep an unclean pool here? Reiko rose horizontally from the pool like a ghost, employing her quirk on herself to exit the murk as quickly as possible. "At least it helped break our fall," the ghostly teen said, prying off her face mask. While her voice remained as monotone as ever, giving no hint as to the heroine in training's annoyance, internally the Sylvette was drowning in worry and grief. Attempting to center herself, Reiko focused her mind on regretting how easily the material of her face mask retained the disgusting smell of the dirty water. The simple thought somewhat helping the Sylvette ignore the fact that she'd just left. No, she couldn't waste time thinking about him right now. "Are you two all right?" Itsuka asked, pushing herself through the pool with sweeps of enlarged hands. "Quickly, we need to move on before that monster catches up to us." It pained the redhead to admit, but their sensei's earlier words really did hold true. They weren't ready to fight against real villains, especially the psychotic and murderous types. Nevesta. That was the name of the masked horror Osoiek had unleashed to hunt them down. Taking a precious moment of their escape time, Itsuka took what scarce information she had and analyzed it. The easiest to start with was the villainous outfit, because those had been feminine curves she'd seen, no doubt. The villainess had worn what appeared to be a military-grade diving suit. Additionally, a harness had wrapped around her body, carrying a number of gun holsters. The handles of blades had stuck out from their sheaths strapped to her back. The skull mask and hood had made distinguishing any facial features impossible, but the way she'd moved, the lack of speech, the almost lackadaisical way she'd chased after them. Nevesta was clearly a predator who was toying with their inexperience. "It was a long fall," Reiko stated, breaking the silence. The ghostly teen floated toward her class president, Kanoko holding onto one of her feet and Toad behind her. Do you think Juku, Hananuki-san is all right?" Any answer was interrupted by a rather soft thud, only heard due to the silence that still enveloped the girls. Itsuka blinked. That had sounded like it had landed right in front of her, at the edge of the pool. "Leave me alone!" Itsuka's scream echoed in the darkness as the redhead flailed as hard as she could in the opposite direction, crossing the width of the pool in seconds. The class president refused to look back until she'd hit and scrambled up and over the edge of the pool. Splash! The strangely ominous sound finally forced the usually level-headed teen to look back. "Quickly! Kanoko, Reiko, before..." The warning died in Itsuka's throat as she gazed out at the pool she'd finally escaped. A smattering of bubbles. Disturbed water sloshing to and fro. Neither of those sights captured the redhead's attention so much as the slowly growing patch of crimson at the center of the pool. Kanoko and Reiko were nowhere to be seen. And Itsuka was pretty sure that darkening stain in the water was right below where Reiko had been floating. Then, Nevesta's head emerged from the middle of the crimson, staring directly at Itsuka through soulless black lenses. "No!" The redhead's scream caught in her throat as she fled the pool, dashing away from the monster that had killed her friends in cold blood as quickly as she could. Blinded by unshed tears, 1B's class president stumbled into a locker room. Slamming into every obstacle along the way, Itsuka managed to pry open a locker. Hating herself for what she was about to do, the hunted redhead crawled into the metal closet and closed the door behind her. Alone, but for who knew how long, Itsuka finally allowed the tears to fall. Again. She'd failed to protect her classmates, her friends, again. Guilt and self-loathing devoured the once proud class president of Class 1B, even as she desperately hoped her hiding place would allow her a few moments of rest. "God, please, somebody help." Back at the pool? Kanoko and Reiko breached the murky water for a second time, gasping for breath. Nevesta had literally jumped on the two, dragging them down to the bottom of the pool and nailing them down to the flooring with two knives the villainess had stabbed into their costumes. Both girls had panicked more for their class president, who was no doubt their attacker's real target, than themselves. Thankfully, it was apparent that the villainess didn't know the extent of their quirks. Reiko was able to use poltergeist to pull the knives free with little issue, after painfully opening her eyes while under the dirty water. "Gah! Bleck!" Kanoko spat, coughing up the brine that had managed to get in her mouth. "I think I drank some. Yuck!" Pushing through the strain of using her quirk so freely, Reiko lifted herself out of the water again. Taking hold of Kanoko's flailing hand, the Sylvette slowly hovered her way to the pool's edge. "Where is Itsuka-san?" Reiko asked flatly, seeing the deck area empty of life. "And why is the water red?" Pausing in the air, both girls looked at the other. It couldn't be. But the thought, once born, wormed its insidious way to the forefront of their minds. Had the villainess already gotten their dear class president, their friend? The red in the water caught their eye again, taking on a whole new meaning with Itsuka's absence. Choking back screams, lest they garner the attention of the murderous villainess hunting them, the heroines in training crash-landed at the edge of the pool. Scrambling to their feet, the two swallowed back the bile threatening to crawl up their throats. Tears streaming down their dirty faces, Reiko and Kanoko fled the pool deck on shaky legs without looking back. They knew, in the crushing silence that followed them, that they were next. Back in the locker room? Having finally managed to get a handle on herself, Itsuka, uncharacteristically timid, gradually opened the locker door that was the only thing keeping her hidden from a roving, murdering villainess. Truthfully, the redhead had halfway expected the silent killer to be waiting right outside the locker for her. She didn't know if she was relieved or not to find the locker room empty. "I'm sorry," Itsuka murmured into the suffocating quiet. It was her fault. Juzo, Reiko, Kinoko? She was responsible for the deaths of all her friends. "I'm so sorry." As she'd cowered in the locker, Itsuka had been unable to ignore her failures. She could have used her quirk. She could have used her hands and her martial arts to keep the villainess occupied while her friends escaped. Sacrificing her hands, or even her own life, would have been preferable to the agony that was gripping her heart at the hands of her guilt for surviving. "I'm going to take her down," Itsuka swore, psyching herself up for what was about to come. "I still need to find a way to contact the outside for help. If we could just call All Might?" Fatigue causing her steps to wobble and pitch, the battered class president of 1B made her way back to the door leading to the pool deck. Whoever had built the structure they'd fallen into had put the only way out opposite of the locker rooms, and now the redhead was regretting even more her life choices. Shaky hands pressed against the latch that worked as the entrance's doorknob. To the redhead's frustration, her quivering limbs seemed to almost resist opening the damn thing. Finally, with a grunt, the door was shoved open. Peeking out, Itsuka felt her stomach drop for the umpteenth time. Twin trails of crimson fluid led from the pool to the pool deck's exit. 1,000,001 thoughts flashed through the redhead's studious mind as she took in the gruesome sight. The possibilities were nearly overwhelming, but two stuck out the heaviest. Either her classmates had somehow survived grievous wounds and fled, or had the villainess dragged their waterlogged bodies away, back to her leader. Both scenarios were nauseating. Walking outside, the tiny flicker of hope Itsuka had been unable to keep in check flickered. There was no sign of her friends. No. Why? Why was she spared? Why she was basically ignored? What was the point of torturing them like this? They were just students. Osoiek had said he wanted All Might. Did he really think their suffering would bring the symbol of peace to him? And how did that monster think he was going to kill the #1 hero? If an engineered super soldier monster couldn't do it, what could? A bioweapon? Bioweapon? Kinoko. A fresh wave of gut-wrenching horror struck Itsuka like lightning. Momo had said that she'd heard from Azui that the monstrosity at the USJ had somehow had multiple quirks. If some villain had managed to devise a way to harvest quirks and use them separate from their original users, what was to say that sort of technique couldn't be used to empower a bioweapon? Itsuka froze. Osoiek had never said what his quirk was. What if he could do something similar to Monoma? Or worse? TSK. The sudden, sharp sound startled the class president so abruptly that she couldn't even scream, her body locking up. The pain in her chest felt like her heart was stopping. Stiffly, stone-like, Itsuka turned around. After everything she'd been through since waking up earlier, the terrified expression she wore was understandable, even though she saw nothing out of the ordinary. Suddenly, the hairs on the back of the redhead's neck rose, goosebumps covering her skin as an indescribable feeling of being watched fell upon her. Giving in to the new feeling of paranoia, Itsuka whirled around frantically. Wherever that sound was coming from, she needed to know. Now. TSK TSK. Itsuka nearly screamed. The eerie sound, like a tongue clicking, came again and again, and she still couldn't find its source. Wait. Hadn't Nevesta moved almost like those ninja from her dad's old movies? What was it he'd always said? Nobody ever looked up? Snapping her gaze upward so harshly she almost cracked her spine, Itsuka peered into the gloom above caused by Ground Gamma's overcrowded skyline. There. Maybe? Above the door she'd just come out of, the redhead thought she could see something. Internally, her mind was screaming that there really was something there, but her eyes persisted in refusing to believe it. The conflict worsened, and Itsuka took a tentative step forward to see if less distance could give her an answer. Was that a line in the shadows? It sort of looked like something there didn't mesh completely with the rest of the wall. Itsuka squinted her eyes. SPLU. Splat. Just to have something gooey strike the teal orbs. The redhead reared back with a scream, immediately blinded. Then the burning, searing pain kicked in. It felt as if her eyeballs were melting. Waves of agony shot through Itsuka's body as she cringed back. Desperation set in, and the suffering class president did the only thing she could think of. Activating her quirk, the redhead grew her hands to their maximum size, swinging them around wildly as she continued to shriek. Itsuka didn't know what the villainess would plan next, or if the killer would simply wait for whatever she'd thrown at her eyes to run its course. Whatever came, the redhead sure as hell wasn't planning on making things easier for her opponent. TSCK. The suppressed report of a silenced gun was nearly drowned out by the screaming of the blinded class president. The redhead's cries suddenly cut off as she dropped to the ground, lifeless as a puppet with its strings cut. Back with Shiozaki's group, unknown location? This isn't happening. This isn't happening. The harried words bounced against the plaster walls of the small supplies shed the group of 3 heroes in training had chosen to hide in as Shiozaki repeated the mantra over and over again. The vine-haired teen had to wake herself up from this nightmare. "Shiozaki-san, calm down," Fukudashi said, lightly shaking the young woman by the shoulders. The comic teen was successful in at least gaining his classmates' fraying attention. "I know you're scared. I am too. But we need to stay calm and get out of this. Together. For our friends." The heroine in training stared back at her bubble-headed classmate and noticed that the emoji signifying Fukudashi's face were shaky characters she'd never seen before. The comic teen was also trembling so much she could feel it through the hands on her shoulders. It took a few calming breaths, but Shiozaki was able to eventually regain enough composure to straighten upright. Yes, you're right," the vine-haired teen managed, willing her fear and guilt down until it could be handled later. Now was the time to plan, not wallow. "Shishidaku-san, what can you tell us about our enemy?" The beastly teen gave only a sigh in reply. Out of their remaining group, it was logical to assume his more animalistic senses would have a far easier time picking up clues from their pursuer than the others. However, "I failed to sense a single thing," Shishida admitted, sagging. Alongside his wild combat ability and intellect, the beastly teen had always been proud of his detecting ability. The revelation of its failure had hit the hero in training hard once he'd had time to process it. "It's likely a result of our foe's quirk. No scent, no sound, not even a change in temperature. Most concerning of all, our enemy exudes not one iota of killing intent either. They are a shadow to me." The disheartening information was not what Shiozaki had been hoping to hear. The idea that an assassin with such ability and self-control was hunting them down only spelled more trouble for the surviving members of Class 1B. They could be taken by surprise at any moment, and be dead before they even knew to be afraid. "So, a powerful masking quirk," Shiozaki finally summarized, moving on to get a better handle on the situation. How the vine-haired teen wished Kendone was still there. Even Monoma would have been able to outmaneuver their pursuer better than she could. At least it's not super strength or, Lord have mercy, an offensive emitter type of some sort. "Rosalie," Fukudashi suddenly added, sounding unsure. "I think that's the name of the one that's after us. It's hard to tell, they all look mostly the same." Huddled together in the gloom, the 3 remaining members of Shiozaki's group thought back to the presentation they'd been forced to witness by the deranged psychopath who'd ambushed and kidnapped Class 1B. Osoiek's manner of dress had been frightening enough, but when the projection had cut to the villain's minions, each of the subordinates had been terrors of their own. Between the 3 heroes in training concentrating on remembering what they'd seen, they were able to confirm Rosalie had been the largest of Osoiek's servants. Unfortunately, besides murdering a member of 1A, there was nothing else recalled. The villain had given no discernible clues as to their ability, or even their gender. "Something has been bothering me," Shishida added, concentrating with a fierce mien. The beastly teen was clearly attempting to connect dots that refused to be tied together. "Osoiek. I believe I've heard that name somewhere." That gained the attention of his 2 classmates for sure. "Shishida-san. I need you to try and remember where you heard it," Shiozaki said firmly, towing the line between requesting and demanding. Even so, the hopeful tone permeating the vine-haired teen's words showed how much a potential weakness meant to her. "It might be the only way we gain a lead that will help us vanquish these villains." While his 2 classmates pored over their knowledge of recent and historic events, even dipping into international news reports, Fukudashi took a step away. The comic teen leaned against one of the shed's dirty walls, keeping an eye on the door as well as his brainstorming friends. That name? Osoiek, it sounded strangely familiar. However, unlike Shishida and Shiozaki, the comic teen knew he'd been far less studious when it came to anything regarding villain attacks before being accepted into UA. That meant that if he remembered hearing the villain's name somewhere, it wasn't from the news. "Class!" Fukudashi shouted, catching the attention of his comrades. "Osoiek. We heard that name in class, not the news." Shiozaki's fair brows furrowed, the vine-haired teen casting her mind back to every lesson Class 1B had gone through since the first day of school. "Was he from a case study?" Shishida asked, the beastly teen also thinking hard on every lesson he and his classmates had been to, every homework assignment they'd been given. "Would that mean that this is all revenge against one of the pros that teach us?" Shiozaki asked, attempting to narrow the possible culprits responsible. "No," Fukudashi said, certainty deepening the comic teen's voice. "I'm pretty sure it wasn't a case study." Then it clicked. The masks shaped like skulls. The oddly specific-sounding names of Osoiek's lackeys. The villain's last words? Das Vidania? "I remember." Fukudashi shouted, an endorphin rush popping the comic teen's head bubble into a spiked starburst. Osoiek is. Crash. Twin arms clad in the yellow sleeves of a raincoat burst through the plaster wall Fukudashi had been resting against, caging him in. Before the comic teen could even scream, he was pulled back into the cloud of debris kicked up by the surprise attack. Crunch. Before either Shiozaki or Shishida could react, the sickening sound froze them stiff. The remaining students felt their stomachs sink once again. They knew in their bones they'd just lost another classmate. Then, the villain Rosalie slowly entered the shed from the thinning cloud of debris. Fukudashi-san. Shiozaki whimpered. She hadn't known her comic-headed classmate all that well. She wasn't like the charismatic Kendone, who could memorize names, quirks, and even personalities in a single day, but that didn't mean she didn't feel terrible for his death. It was her failures that had gotten her group into this situation, her sins that had cost them their lives. We have no choice, Shishida stated, stepping in between Shiozaki and the approaching villain. The beastly teen was seeing red, the slow ponderous gait of their enemy only making him angrier. We will have to fight. Shiozaki flinched back at the stoic declaration, her every instinct railing against the idea even as her mind was dragged toward the truth of it. But, my blessing. The vine-haired teen stammered, body and mind rebelling, it's only meant to be used to protect and save the innocent. Even as she spoke, Shiozaki felt a pit of guilt open in her soul at her words, her excuses. Her entire life, she'd believed in the beauty of Mother Nature, and that the gift bestowed upon her at birth had been a sign. She'd been meant for the life of a pacifistic heroine, one that preached to the masses to embrace peace. That lifelong belief had been one of the reasons she'd chosen the dress of a Grecian goddess as her hero costume, why she'd never used her gift for any purpose that could harm another. She couldn't afford to dirty her hands with sin if she were to lead the people to salvation. And now that belief was going to get them killed. Then I will keep this villain occupied while you escape. Shishida roared, hulking up into a truly enormous beast. In this form, the hero in training easily towered over the encroaching Rosalie. In muted horror, Shiozaki watched as her protector launched forward and threw himself at the villain. She looked on as the murderer hardly so much as flinched at the sight of the oncoming beast. She gazed, wide-eyed, into the soulless lenses of their pursuer, the reflective glass failing to convey any form of human emotion. And she stared, shocked, as the villain effortlessly caught Shishida's clawed hands in their own as if it were nothing. Impossible. Shiozaki muttered, the sight of her classmate being pushed back, his massive size counting for nothing, almost too much. It wasn't supposed to be super strength. Ack. Shishida, still swollen with the power of his quirk, snarled as Rosalie snapped out a fist and struck him across the face. I kill you. Dead. Unable to fully process the fact that he now had a broken nose, the beastly teen swung a fist low, managing to connect the strike with a satisfying crack of something breaking. And yet, the villain again refused to even flinch. While the two titans began to trade blows, Shiozaki realized this was the chance to escape that her classmate had put himself into a fight for his life for. As the vine-haired teen inched toward the shed's flimsy door, part of her agreed with her course of action. Getting help was a priority, she wasn't cut out for front-line fighting anyway. Another, harsher part, demanded the heroine in training stay and cease allowing her friends to die. Rar. Wham! The meaty sound of a body striking an immovable object forced Shiozaki to turn and look back. Her flickering hopes of seeing Shishidakuin standing victorious were thoroughly crushed by the sight that greeted her. In a move that must have been too quick for the beastly teen to follow, Rosalie had managed to grab the hero in training by the neck and slam him against the wall, the shoddy plaster cracking around his enlarged body. The tall villain seemed to enjoy strangling their victims. No. The words hardly carried from Shiozaki's gasping lips, the vine-haired teen rooted in place due to the impossibility before her. Shishidakuin was, in terms of raw power, the strongest member of Class 1B when in the thralls of his quirk. Even Tetsutetsu admitted to losing an arm wrestling match against the furred teen. For him to be defeated, they'd never stood a chance. Arun, Ibha. Shishida wheezed through his collapsing trachea. The desperate plea added further weight to Shiozaki's crushed heart. Ru. Rosalie reared back a first and struck. Hard. With the same ponderousness the villain had showcased when pursuing them earlier, the beating began. Each punch was a surgical strike to Shishida's solar plexus. After one, the beastly teen was spitting up saliva and choking, a second brought him to hacking up blood, after three the hero in training could no longer hold on to his quirk, and deflated. Let him go! Shiozaki shrieked, finally reacting. Flinging an arm out, strands of her hair vines whipped out and wrapped around the arm Rosalie had been using to pummel Shishida. With a dark thought, the restricting vegetation sprouted wicked thorns, impaling the villain's captured limb. Rosalie paused, turning to look at the new combatant who'd entered the fray. The villain's head tilted to the side, silent confusion, a mocking commentary on how much of a threat the vine-haired teen was considered. After all, what did she hope to accomplish? I said. Whatever Shiozaki had meant to say went unsaid, as Rosalie finally reacted. As expected of one gifted with superior strength, especially when pitted against someone who'd foregone proper anchoring, a simple yank of the vine-entombed arm was all that was needed to lift Shiozaki off her feet and pull her forward. When the now panicked student had been drawn stumbling into range, the villain then swung again. The strike hit Shiozaki so hard the vine-haired teen went tumbling to the floor, reeling at the pain the swift act of violence had left her. The thorns she'd hatefully grown had turned on her as well, scratching lines of blood across her once angelic face. Dazed, it took a long moment before the world righted itself for the heroine in training. When it did, Shiozaki found herself helpless as she watched Rosalie sharply jab an open hand, directly into Shishidakuin's abdomen. A sickening spray of blood discharged from around the villain's impaling hand, painting the accursed appendage crimson. Just as sharply, Rosalie pulled back, the murderer taking pieces and bits of the beastly teen's intestines in a tight grip. Shiozaki felt herself shaking. The world darkened at the edges of her vision. She took in Shishida's blank gaze, his cracked glasses doing nothing to hide an expression rife with pain and suffering. Such blatant, careless sadism. It was too much. Too much. Something once indomitably strong but now fragile inside Shiozaki snapped. Dai itarai. The screech of fury was nigh unintelligible. Her weariness and fatigue washed away by waves of unbridled rage, the vine-haired heroine in training launched herself at the villain who'd taken so much from her. Unlike her previous attempt, Shiozaki pulled no punches this time. Her blessings, her gift, were now barbed by wickedly sharp thorns, the ends of each capped by serrated points. Remembering as much human anatomy as she could from lessons learned ages ago, the rampaging heroine in training directed her weaponized vines toward every vital point her target possessed that she could think of. God have mercy on this villain, for she no longer felt herself capable. In the blink of an eye, she struck, and Rosalie was nailed to the wall like the world's goriest entomological display. Vines, wickedly thorned, acted as pins and pierced the villain's body. A body that went limp as Shiozaki watched, now unmoving and unresponsive. A body that was now dead. The shock instantly hit the ex-pacifist hard enough to knock her from her enraged state. Shiozaki fell back on her ass, able to do nothing but take in the sight of what she'd done in the stark light that filtered into the decrepit shed. Denial flooded the vine-haired teen, and she shook her head frantically. Unexpectedly, the jerky movement caused the vine spearing through Rosalie's corpse to crack and break, the vegetation having hardened completely as a result of their wielder's unhinged desire to exterminate her foe. Falling back again, Shiozaki rolled to the side just in time, her stomach rebelling against reality. The bile burned as it rushed up her throat, but not nearly as much as the vine-haired teen felt her soul burning. As she heaved, the heroine in training felt lightheaded, the world threatening to spin out of control. She couldn't get enough air. Were her eyes blurring? Shiozaki had to get away. She had to flee from her sin. Oh Heavenly Father, she'd murdered someone. Taken a life, before the sight alone drove her mad. Scrambling back, the vine-haired teen found herself unable to take her eyes away from the villain Shiozaki's hand landed in something squishy and warm. Looking down at her shaking hand, the shattered heroine in training realized what she'd unintentionally touched, a pool of blood and intestines. Shishidakuin's blood and intestines. Shiozaki screamed. She screamed and screamed as she ran. Elsewhere, location unknown? Tetsu, the manliest student of Class 1B, would be the first to admit he wasn't one to demand, or even ask for, the role of leadership. He was manly enough to recognize his shortcomings, namely his lack of strategic thinking and logistical intellect, when it came to working with others, and honestly tried to improve them. But he knew he was no Kendone. As such, being appointed leader of his group after they'd woken up from the ambush hadn't been his choice. He wanted that to be known. But the others had followed his lead without issue, some even asking him to step forward, so he had. They trusted him to take point, guide them to safety. Well, he sure as hell wasn't going to disappoint them. Unfortunately for the steely teen, the masked villain he and his group had just stumbled upon, the same villain now blocking their path, was giving him a stark reminder of why he normally preferred to leave leadership to others. Just one of you? Tetsu spat, hoping his bravado would boost his group's morale. You really think you can take us all on? The villain remained unresponsive, only moving both arms upwards laterally so dual weapons could expand from under oversized sleeves. The pair of telescopic batons clicked into place, sparks of electricity running the length of the metal bludgeons. Be bad man, to be dangerous. Pony Tsunatori stuttered out, doing her best to communicate through her broken Japanese. The tense atmosphere was making the exchange student's language problem even more difficult, but she pushed through her frustration. What do we do? Tetsu chanced a glance back, taking in his weary group. Kojiro Bando was trembling, his seven-eye spout things tearing up with his quirk's glue-like substance. Cozy-Eye Tsubiraba looked doubtful, the solid air user clearly not liking their chances against an unknown foe. Neither member of Class 1B had shown much skill as frontliners, and the steely team knew involving them in a fight was a big no unless otherwise unavoidable. Pony stood to the left, her large eyes watery but resolute. The blonde was ready to back him up if Tetsu needed her, which was nice. Lastly, the steely teen locked eyes with Class 1B's other exchange student, Hiryu Rin. Are you electricity resistant? Rin asked, his Japanese better than Pony's although still stilted and accented. Thankfully for Tetsu, he knew the Chinese national had been doing what he couldn't, analyzing their opponent. Hoping the ponytailed teen had a plan, the steely hero in training nodded confidently. Of course I am, Tetsu boasted, activating his quirk on his arms. The muscled steel gleamed as he flexed. I won't feel a thing. I'm grounded for anything less than a lightning strike man. Rin nodded, eyes hardening as he took a stance. Then, when I faint, you go full frontal. Scales rippled down the Chinese teen's arms and up his neck, giving off a very draconic vibe. With an ease that surprised himself, the steely teen realized he knew exactly what his classmate had planned. He was going to be the lock that would keep the villain immobilized long enough to disarm. Tetsu felt his blood begin to fire up. They were going on the offensive. Good plan, Tetsu said with a nod, turning to Pony. Pony, be ready. Once I engage, use your quirk with everything you've got. But you take hurting. Pony cried, understandably worried. Tetsu's honest smile only slightly relieved the blonde's concern. Don't worry. Tetsu said, allowing his quirk to activate. His now iconic transformation flowed over him like liquid silver, turning him into a living statue of steel. I can take it. A sudden, repetitive breathing noise came from the villain, returning the attention of the members of Class 1B to the task at hand. With a final, resolute nod to each other, the heroes in training moved to put their plan into action. Rin darted forward as Pony planted her feet wide and lowered her head. Tetsu psyched himself up for the wrestle of a lifetime, and took a step forward. They were ready for this. They were combat specialists. This villain, whose weapons pointed to being the one called Sela, wouldn't stand a chance. However, no plan survives first contact in battle. Pridurok. The shout was synthesized, foreign, and genderless, but the insult was clear as the masked villain suddenly dashed forward. With inhuman speed, Sela reached Rin before the Chinese teen could build enough momentum. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as the martial artist could only watch as the villain raised both sparking batons overhead to bludgeon him. Sheer instinct kicked in, and the hero in training broke form to throw his arms up and shield himself. He braced for impact and electrical discharge. The attack, however, came from below. You are GK. Rin's groan rose an entire octave as the Chinese teen slumped to the ground, pale and unresponsive. The kick to his genitals had been incredibly underhanded, but extremely effective. True to villainous form, Sela had decided to take out target number 1 with a strike to the male body's weakest point. The villain's heavy boot had managed to accomplish what Rin's opponents in Class 1B's battle trial hadn't, taking the martial artist out with a single strike. Tetsu, Bando, and Tsubiraba collectively winced as feelings of empathetical pain coursed through their own bodies. Even Pony looked on aghast at witnessing such brutal attack. The hesitation cost them. Coldly, Sela raised both batons and brought them down on the paralyzed Rin, shocking him with enough voltage to cause a seizure. The Chinese teen convulsed under the assault before collapsing limply. The martial artist didn't get back up or make any further sign of life. He just laid there, unmoving, without even so much as a twitch. You bastard. Tetsu charged forward, confident in his quirk's ability to protect him from such tactics. The steely teen would take his physical advantage and use it to pummel this villain scum into the dirt. He'd avenge his fallen comrade and protect his friends. Taking the challenge head-on, Sela charged as well, using Rin's body as a springboard. The two titanic forces soared toward a climatic finish. Only for the villain to shift at the last second and shove a shoulder into Tetsu's steely abdomen. The hero in training felt his center of gravity change before he realized what was going on. Helpless to counter, the steely teen was forced to follow as his momentum carried his upper body up and over. Another shift from Sela, and Tetsu had to brace for impact as he was thrown bodily over the villain. Temporarily free of interference, Sela immediately charged against a frozen Pony. You! Stop now! the equine teen shouted, firing her horns. Unfortunately, inexperience caused the heroine in training to mistime her attack, and the villain got in too close, too soon. Ugh! Pony bent over double, her stomach hit full force by Seela's heavily booted foot. The villain had dropped to a slide, completely evading the equine teen's airborne projectiles before delivering a devastating kick. In an incredible act of strength and gymnastic talent, Seela punched the ground to twist into a handstand, only to roundhouse kick Pony in the head once in position. The hurting girl ragdolled, the sheer force applied to the kicks enough to leave her dazed as she rolled on the ground. "Leave her alone!" Tetsu shouted, having recovered just enough to watch as the cute girl was mercilessly pummeled. Scrambling to his feet, the steely teen jumped to the rescue. The repetitive breathing returned, and Seela turned to face the incoming human missile. Hero in training and villain reached to engage in a powerhouse brawl. Except there wasn't. Tetsu threw punch after punch, aiming to take down the nearly silent villain with a single hit. Unfortunately, the steely teen's righteous fury and untrained fighting style left his strikes slow and heavily telegraphed. Seela, on the other hand, appeared to focus more on evading, lightly tapping the metal-bound hero in training with one or both batons when he couldn't retaliate and it was safe to strike. The villain's movements were smooth, fluid, and well-practiced, a deadly dance expertly enacted. Anger rising at his failure to land an attack, Tetsu hardly realized his thoughts were clouding. Unable to pick up on how his opponent was guiding him around the battlefield, the steely teen launched himself forward time and again. Until he tripped. On Rin's body. What the? When no retaliatory strike came, Tetsu looked up in bafflement at the sudden change of pace. The steely teen found himself in the perfect position to watch as his villainous opponent stood over a new target. Head, hurts, Owie. Pony, only now recovered enough from the brutal hit that had sent her rolling, didn't immediately realize the danger. It was only after a shadow rose up from behind her that the equine teen chanced to look up, and saw the villain now standing over her. Dual baton sparked. "Humor it," Seela uttered. The word was menacing, not a war cry, but a declaration. To her credit, Pony did her best to avoid the strike. The equine teen didn't know how potent the villain's batons were, but she knew based off what had happened to Rin she didn't want to be hit by them. Flinching, the blonde prepared for the worst. Only for her vision to be obscured as powerful, metallic arms wrapped her in their firm embrace. "Pony!" Tetsu shouted, determined to save the cute classmate in his arms. He'd made it though, and now she was safe. The manly teen felt the batons tap his steeled back. "Eahawa!" Pony's scream was the stuff of nightmares, reverberating in Tetsu's ears like a banshee's wail. Electrical sparks flew through the air unbidden. Belatedly, the steely teen realized the horrible truth. Steel might have protected him from electrocution, but it also made him a conductor. The girl in his arms was being tortured in spite of, no, because of, his efforts. Finally, the batons lost charge, and the flow of electricity tapered to a stop. Shaking, Tetsu realized the blonde in his arms was no longer moving. "Pony?" Tetsu lightly shook the equestrian girl. Prussian blue eyes did not open to meet his own. A comfortingly sweet voice did not call out to him. Pony didn't respond at all. Still relegated to the background, Tsubiraba and Bondo gasped in horror. The two felt guilt flood them. Being deadweight was not what they'd applied to UA to be, but their bodies were frozen stiff in fear. They couldn't move. Pridurak. The foreign word, spoken again, was followed by the repetitive noise that the villain had made twice before. Only now, the heroes in training realized what the sound was. Laughter. As gently as he could, Tetsu lowered the blonde in his arms to the ground. Letting her go, the steely teen rose up, glaring directly into the soulless lenses of the masked villain. Mirth. Bloodlust. Disappointment. Tetsu somehow knew these were what his opponent was feeling, even though the skull mask still obscured their face. But it didn't matter. He'd had enough. Screw fair treatment, and screw getting expelled. He was going to break every bone in this freak's body, and avenge his classmates. Grera! Tetsu roared, charging once more against the villain who'd taken two of his classmates, his friends, away from him. The steely teen let go, no longer mindful of his superhuman strength or the morality of using his quirk as he was. He attacked with reckless abandon. Seela evaded the swinging arms of the enraged Sylvette like flowing water, always just out of reach. Twisting around, the villain finally struck out and nailed the steely teen in the temples, stunning him, before repositioning behind him. Wrapping both arms around the hero in training, the masked murderer executed a perfect German suplex. The move was forceful enough to bury Tetsu's head and shoulders into the ground, leaving the steely teen's legs to flail uselessly in the air. With that annoyance dealt with for the moment, Sela turned toward the terrified duo that had done absolutely nothing so far. The two so-called heroes in training were cowering now, the sight of a villain advancing on them too much. Shock batons engaged, held at the ready. Tetsu frantically struggled to free himself. He didn't have time to be stuck, his classmates were in danger. Neither of the boys would stand a chance alone. On top of that, he needed to get Pony and Rin to safety. They couldn't be dead, please no, so their wounds had to be severe to be so unresponsive. The Sylvette could only hope that Tsuburaba could keep an air shield up long enough for him to free himself. "You wa!" Tetsu shouted as he finally managed to forcefully unbury his head and shoulders. Shaking off the lingering head trauma, the steely teen looked for his remaining classmates. And dearly regretted doing so. Both Tsuburaba and Bondo were sprawled out on the ground, blood covering their chests and splattered all over the ground. Rin's talisman-like visor was coated in blood, the characters once prominent no longer visible. Sela stood alone, a looming shadow over Pony's immobile form, with a silenced pistol in hand. The elongated barrel was aimed at the defenseless heroine in training's head. No! Tetsu, for the first time in his life, felt the paralyzing grip of utter fear and despair. "Please. No." Sela turned to the shaken teen, soulless lenses secreting away whatever dastardly emotion the villain felt at achieving such a complete victory. Then, without looking away, fanfare, monologue, or any sign of remorse or hesitation, the murderer fired. TSCK. Several times. TSCK. 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 Small gouts of blood splatter rewarded each suppressed shot, although none so much as dirted Sela's yellow raincoat. Pony remained as unmoving as before, but any hope of the equine teen surviving the day had died, just as she had. "Bespalazny malchik," Sela said plainly before laughing that hoarse, breathy laugh. Then, apparently satisfied, the villain simply walked away. Unspoken but clearly delivered was the message: the remaining hero in training wasn't even worth the effort. Tetsu stared at his dead classmates for what felt like an eternity. His manly heart had been broken, his steely resolve lost. His failures, not only as a hero, but as a man, stared back at him for the world to see. He'd been one of the loudest of Class 1B demanding a chance at action. But it was now clear to the Sylvette that he was nowhere near ready for the real world, and his classmates had paid for that inexperience. A single tear slipped free from his thick eyelashes. Standing, the shattered hero in training hardened his resolve. Stealing his body, Tetsu raced after the villain that had taken nearly everything from him. He swore as he ran, he'd avenge each and every one of them. And if he was arrested for murder afterwards, then so be it. Ground Gamma, Central Building Structure P4RT4. Setsuna Tokage had known her instincts had been right on the money. There was no way that the leader of a cell of villains brazen enough to attack UA students wouldn't use this specific building as a center of operations, it was too grandiose. Luckily, she'd woken up with her classmates Senkaibara and Yui Kodai, whose quirks had come in handy in infiltrating the structure undetected after she'd convinced them a surprise attack was their best chance. And after silently traversing empty halls for what felt like hours, the trio had finally found the despicable Osoiek in the penthouse suite. Like she'd said, typical villain. "Are you ready?" Setsuna whispered to her classmates, keeping an eye on the big bad as he stared out of the wall-length window of his suite, the main room full of metal canisters. The quiet duo nodded in affirmation. The idea was simple: if they took down the leader, they'd both win and save everyone in one fell swoop. A quick glance around the suite had shown that besides the numerous canisters littered about, a large metal case, a laptop, and the desk the two former sat on, there was no indication of any other objects in the room or that Osoiek was armed or had defenses of any kind in place. This was going to be easy. "Let's go!" Utilizing their element of surprise, Setsuna announced their arrival loudly as she charged the front door, hoping to throw the villainous mastermind off. Kaibara and Kodai quickly followed. Snap! Tha thump! The moment she passed through the entryway, Setsuna knew she'd fucked up. Aha! Whipping around, the reptilian-loving teen was powerless but to watch Kaibara and Kodai scream bloody murder as their bodies convulsed under the electrified capture net trap their brash entrance had set off. While the forest green Verdinet had avoided the snare, her classmates hadn't been so lucky. After only a few seconds of torture, the trap exhausted itself, and the flow of electricity frying Setsuna's friends died away. The two collapsed, unmoving, to the ground, leaving the recommendation student alone against the leader of the villains who'd attacked Class 1B. "Did you truly believe I would be so unprepared? That I wouldn't plan for one of you to think to come after me?" Osoiek asked as he turned to face the lone heroine in training. "Or that your every move wasn't being observed since the moment you entered this place?" Setsuna blinked, the corner of her eye-catching sight of the laptop she'd seen earlier. Focusing on the device, to her shock and horror its screen was cycling through camera feeds, all of which were focused on each place she and her team had gone through after entering the building. The reptilian-loving teen cursed. She really had forgotten that the entirety of UA testing sites, like Ground Gamma, were covered by surveillance systems. The frustrated recommendation student grit her teeth at the rookie mistake that had cost her and her team. Was the big bad checking her out? If the tilting of the villain's mask was anything to go by, he was at least taking in her suit. Well, Osoise was still a male. It made her skin crawl, but Setsuna could make that work. Her costume had turned out slightly sexier than originally intended anyway. Might as well use any advantage she could get. I'm pretty sure I've got plenty more surprises left for you, big boy, Setsuna finally said, clamping down on the urge to vomit at her words. It was just an act. Putting on her best salacious smile and bedroom eyes, hiding all her fear and revulsion as she did so, the reptilian-loving teen put her hands on her hips and posed provocatively to showcase her budding hourglass figure, growing breasts, and slim thighs. Now why don't you come over here, Anne? I wasn't aware the prestigious UA endorsed prostitution. Osoie cut through Setsuna's attempted seduction with cold words and a judgmental stare she could feel even through the villain's mask. The stark admonishment caused the heroine in training to flinch. Are you a heroine or a harlot? Should I draw my gun on you or my cock? Truly I am undecided. The crass words, though spoken mockingly through the villain's synthesized voice, were nonetheless weighted with threat. Setsuna swallowed thickly as she realized her second mistake. While she might have enjoyed acting the role of dirty-minded flirt while in battle, just the thought of this villain actually putting his hands on her made the reptilian-loving teen almost panic. What the fuck had she been thinking? Observing the anxious pallor of the now paralyzed student, Osoie snorted in amusement, the contemptuous noise butchered by the villain's synthesizer. Fear not, girl. For now, there's no need to fear for your virtue. Osoie said, a mutilated chuckle following the assurance. The deranged villain obviously found something funny. That is, if you still even have any. Instantly, Setsuna felt her fear and anxiety die in the face of utter rage. The gall of the villain blew through much of the recommendation student's clear thinking and right into her shit list. The lone heroine in training was pretty much raring to beat her enemy to a pulp now. You talk too much shit for a scumbag within striking distance. Setsuna shouted, leaping into action. It's over. Unlike her classmates, this particular recommendation student of Class 1B had an ace up her sleeve. The reptilian-loving teen had the basics of a super move ready and waiting to test out. Using her quirk, Setsuna split her body into sections, her arms, legs, head, and torso separate entities set to attack. Her target remaining stationary gave the heroine in training a confidence boost. The villain didn't even know how to handle her bizarre attack. Perfect. You are correct, Osoie drawled, it is. Without warning, Setsuna felt her control of her satellite limbs falter and disappear. The separated body parts fell to the ground, completely numb, although her head unfortunately felt the full impact. Osoie, who the recommendation student was only now beginning to realize was a villainous mastermind, took only 3 steps before reaching her detached head. Carefully, almost lovingly, the psychopath lifted the scattered heroine in training up, turning her in his hands like a misshapen ball so that she was forced to look directly into his frightening mask. The villain even went so far as to brush the reptilian-loving teen's forest green hair out of the way so that her sight wouldn't be impaired. What did you do? Setsuna whimpered, terror trembling her voice and threatening to lock her jaw. Me? Not a thing, Osoie replied, absolutely calm as he stared into his captive's eyes. You are the one who brazenly rushed into a room filled with an active airborne bioweapon. The insane leader of the villains tilted Setsuna's disconnected head to the side so that the heroine in training could take in their surroundings. It was only now that the recommendation student realized that each and every canister in the room was labeled with the yellow and black biohazard symbol. And no. But that means? Setsuna could hardly breathe. It was only after her frantic thoughts finished connecting all the dots that she felt able to try and speak again. From the very beginning? There, now, at the edge of the end, literally in the hands of the enemy, the heroine in training finally understood. The gas that had knocked Class 1B and the teachers out had been Osoie's bioweapon from the start. Her entire class had been condemned before they'd even woken up. The entire rescue operation and game of their captor had been nothing more than a front to study his weapon's effects so as to better utilize it against All Might. You were already dead, yes, Osoie confirmed, walking over and setting Setsuna's head down on the desk next to the laptop. The simple words reverberated deeply within the heroine in training's displaced heart. The recommendation hardly had a chance to accept her inevitable death, before another shock hit her. That is, unless I give you this antidote of mine. Setsuna's eyes instantly zeroed in on the tiny vial that was set before her on the desk. It glowed a venomous green. To be honest, you intrigue me, Setsuna Tokage. Your quirk is versatile, unusual, and strong beyond measure, Osoiek said, stepping into Setsuna's limited view. The impartiality of the supervillain's mask for once contradicted the inflection that had entered his words. It's also absolutely wasted as it is now, being taught by damaged and weak heroes. The supervillain paused, tenderly caressing the dark hair of the recommendation student. If Setsuna could have flinched away, she would have. Being forced to take the touch would haunt the reptilian-loving teen for weeks to come, if she lived that long. Pledge yourself to me, Setsuna Tokage. Become a participant in my experiments to create the next generation of world leaders. Osoiek's instability became clear the more he spoke, though his tone never wavered and he remained as stone-cold as death. Our combined genetic creations would be amongst the most brilliant and resilient inheritors of the world. Nothing would stop them, heroes, villains, governments, nothing. The true meaning of the supervillain's offer wasn't lost to the captive heroine in training. Osoiek wasn't just inviting her to join the bad guys, he was propositioning her to enter into a quirk marriage with him. I know you'll make the right choice, Osoiek said, cutting through Setsuna's desperate silence and dragging her attention back. Just as my dear Nevesta did not so long ago. For a singular moment, Setsuna felt her shock, fear of death, and pride as a future heroine wage an honest-to-God total war within her. Thankfully, the victor prevailed quickly. Fuck you. Although the recommendation student had managed enough willpower to grit out her answer, the fact that she'd even considered the other offer disgusted her. Regardless of whether or not another had accepted it, Osoiek's offer made the reptilian-loving teen feel filthy just thinking about. I believe that opportunity has passed, Osoiek quipped, taking Setsuna's head and dumping it into an empty canister that had been sitting under the desk. But if you insist, have it your way then. The last thing Setsuna would see would be a grenade dropped onto her head. Boom. Once silence had returned to the room, Osoiek sighed heavily. Shaking himself and straightening, the supervillain walked over to the metal case he'd been saving and opened it. Inside rested an assembled heavy sniper rifle. It appears to be time for Galubi season. Ground Gamma, Main Street. The gates were in sight. There was no denying it. They'd failed to find even a single hostage, but escape was possible. And yet? Kanoko and Reiko found themselves extremely hesitant. The two couldn't muster the courage to leave their guarded hiding spot tucked away in an alley. We just need to get over there, Reiko stated, monotone as ever. Even drenched to the bone and scared out of her mind, the ghostly teen expressed little to no emotion. How are you holding up, Kino-chan? The Sylvette had purposefully used a pet name she knew her shorter friend hated, hoping to elicit a response. Unfortunately, the one she got was not the one hoped for. I am fine. Kanoko replied stiffly, looking a ghastly mixture of petrified and disheveled. We need to hurry up though so we can save Kendone and the others. If she were the type, Reiko would have sighed. Her friend was losing it, seemingly stuck in denial. But she just couldn't bring herself to drag the traumatized girl back to reality. Not yet at least. Whatever you say, Kino-chan, Reiko said instead, leaning around the corner slowly. She didn't have the best night vision, but she still had to try and see if she could make out Nevesta's shape lurking in the shadows anywhere. Wait, isn't that Ibra-san? With short hair? At Kanoko's sudden exclamation, Reiko spun around, feet even leaving the ground temporarily in her haste. Cobalt orbs flickered over the industrial wasteland that had become their prison, searching feverishly for signs of their vine-haired classmate. If they could join up with someone, anyone, else, then their chances of escape would exponentially increase. When she found her, Reiko was almost glad she couldn't sob at the sight of Shiozaki that greeted her. The once always calm and collected girl looked ragged and unhinged, vine locks short and uneven. The girl looked to be aimlessly stumbling forward with no clear destination in mind. Ibra-san. Only a decibel or two below shrieking, Reiko couldn't help but notice Kanoko's tone of voice sounded somewhat hysterical. Shiozaki-san. Reiko raised her voice as much as she could, the Sylvette hoping that 2 consecutive shouts would prove to their staggering classmate that she wasn't hallucinating. Luckily, that seemed to be the case, and Shiozaki began to look around for who'd called out to her. When the vine-haired teen spotted them, her devastated mien rose, morphing into one of hesitant hope and joy. Unable to help herself, the ex-pacifist began to jog in the direction of the first friendly faces she'd seen in a long time. Komori-san. Yanagi-san. If Shiozaki sounded somewhat broken as she screamed their names, neither heroine in training deigned to mention it. What mattered was that they had finally found a friend. Flush with a giddy sense of hope, Kanoko snagged one of Reiko's ever-draped hands, and yanked the silhouette behind her. Before Reiko could object, her teary-eyed friend had pulled her from their cover. That was a mistake. Boom! The sudden roar followed a blinding firework of light that bloomed from the side of the head of the overzealous mushroom-themed girl. When the unexpected flash had receded, Kanoko was already sprawled on the ground, a massive splatter of crimson liquid drenching her. The unexpected violence shouldn't have surprised her, not after today, but staring down at the unmoving figure of her friend, after everything they'd already been through, was too much for even the stoic Reiko to bear. "Kino-chan," the Sylvette murmured, total defeat wrapping an icy fist around her throat. The ghostly teen took a single step. Boom! Shiozaki froze, now staring at the blood-soaked corpses of both Yanagi and Komori. Tears came unbidden to already flooded eyes. This was her fault too. If the two hadn't seen her, hadn't called out and realized how broken she was, they wouldn't have come out of hiding. They would still be alive if she just disappeared. The vine-haired teen swallowed thickly. She was no messiah of life and peace. She was only a harbinger of death and pain. Taking a last glance at the wide-open gates, Shiozaki gave up. It wasn't worth it anymore. She'd lost everything. The ex-pacifist allowed exhaustion to take her, and gratefully embraced the emptiness of unconsciousness. In her despair, the once proud heroine in training had one last thought. If the villains took her, at least then her cursed existence would lead to their deaths. Such a wicked idea was the closest thing to a happy thought that Shiozaki could muster before everything went black. Sometime later, ground gamma, dark room. Itsuka cracked her eyes open. The redhead had been awake for some time now, 15 minutes or so, but had only now felt the waves of searing agony that had pulsed through her entire body originating from the poisoned orbs ebb away. Realizing she could think and focus again, the martial artist had turned all of her willpower to keep herself from groaning and remaining completely relaxed. It had paid off. She'd been left alone, and as far as she could tell no one had come to check on her. The villains hadn't even tied her up either, meaning they hadn't expected her to awaken so soon. For once, the redhead felt like she could truly move undetected and do something. A prisoner? Another hostage? Why was I captured? Am I the only one? Itsuka's thoughts ran a mile a minute as she fought the numb stiffness of her body to stand. The action wasn't only unnaturally painful for its simplicity, it was downright tiresome as well. It was as if a powerful tranquilizer had been used to knock her out, and she was now suffering the aftereffects. Maybe the others are around here somewhere too. Itsuka consciously fought down the growing hope she could feel viciously trying to take root in her heart. She repeated a single fact to anchor herself to her stark reality. If Osoiek had honestly wanted to keep his hostages, he wouldn't have set up his sick game in the first place. There was something more going on here. Legs feeling like fleshy bricks of concrete, Itsuka exited the room she'd woken up in and did her best to limp her way down the connected corridor. She had no clue as to where she was, or where Osoiek and his lackeys were. It wasn't the best situation, but it could be. She stopped herself from thinking that forbidden thought. The hallway seemed to go on forever, lined with locked doors, but eventually Itsuka came upon one that was slightly ajar. Seeing light coming from behind it, the heroine in training gathered what courage she had left, and took a peek inside. She gasped in surprised shock. That girl from the support course? The redhead screamed in her head. The pinkette was barely tied to her chair, but even so she was hardly moving at all. Closer inspection revealed the inventor in training was in really bad shape, with her skin sallow and eyes dim. Opening the door as slowly as possible so as to avoid discovery, Itsuka limped her way to the tied-up student. Who's there? The coarse voice that nearly faded into the silence was so weak it was nothing like the exuberance that the pinkette had shown at her arrival earlier. Honestly, Itsuka was thankful for that. A friend, the heroine in training replied at a whisper once she was close enough. Are you okay? Can you walk? The class president of Class 1B, if it still existed, knew that trying to carry a hostage out of any area where villains still roamed free would be suicide. Hell, even just exiting whatever building they were in now would be impossible. But it turned out the room the pinkette had been kept in had a window. Even without looking out from it, Itsuka could tell the drop wouldn't be too high. Not in this situation. I think so, Hatsum replied, massaging her wrists. I think I just caught a cold or something. Shouldn't have pulled those all-nighters on the Mecharex. Itsuka forced herself to smile at the flimsy joke. Humor was a good sign, and it wasn't the pinkette's fault she didn't know about the horrors she'd gone through before getting to her. While Hatsum began to stretch her stiff limbs, Itsuka took stock of her situation again. She was on at least the second floor. The entrance to ground gamma was in view. She'd found a hostage. An unknown amount of villains were still at large, including their leader Osoiek. She had no backup. The plan was quick, easy, and desperate. Itsuka would help Hatsum down to ground level with the rope she'd been tied up with. Then, the Pinkette would go for help. Meanwhile, Itsuka would stay behind and make sure no villains followed her. Thinking on that last point, Itsuka shuddered. She could only guess as to the fates of her classmates, but hopefully Tetsu was still out there fighting. And Shishida had to have taken out at least one of the murdering band of psychos. If she could distract what remained even for a little bit, then Hatsum would be able to escape and report the situation to the school and All Might. Being rescued from this hell sounded nice, but the redhead once again refused to let her hopes rise too high. So, we can leave? Hatsum asked, earning a hard stare from the wrung-out president of what was once Class 1B. Yeah, you can leave, through the window, Itsuka replied, ignoring the blank look returned by the inventor in training. Look, I need you to get outside, undetected, and find All Might. Preparing the rope for the Pinkette's escape was easy to do, and didn't even require looking away from the increasingly confused-looking Hatsum. What? The support student seemed unable to comprehend what was going on. That was okay, it was to be expected of a captive in a hostage situation. They might not always know how dangerous the situation really was. Like now. There's no time to explain. I need you to run as fast as you can for the gate and get help, Itsuka said, putting all of her natural charisma into sounding as convincing as possible. We all need your help here. Please be quick. The lie burned as it left the redhead's tongue. But was it a lie if she didn't know whether or not there was a weave left? The Pinkette finally nodded in agreement, and Itsuka immediately felt dirty for lying. But it was necessary. Oh, okay? Hatsum stammered, hesitant in the way one is when not being rescued after the villain was taken down, but when being rescued in secret. It took only 2 minutes for Itsuka to tie the rope to the Pinkette and begin to help her out the window and to the ground below. Then, the redhead heard the door open. Isuka kept a strong face for the entirety of the time she lowered Hatsum to the ground, even as footsteps neared her every second. She managed to keep that stalwart visage as the support student touched down and took the ropes off like an expert. Through a shared thumbs up and watching the Pinkette jog away toward Ground Gamma's gate, she kept that strength. What little hope she still carried in her heart, it all rested on Hatsum's retreating shoulders. Itsuka turned to face her fate. Pozdravlyu. Osoiek began a slow clap after speaking, masked face as unreadable as ever. At the mastermind's back stood the villainous Nevesta and the imposing Rosalie. The trio seemed mostly in perfect condition, although bits of Shiozaki's hair could be seen stuck in the latter's coat. The pieces were coated in blood as well. Itsuka bit her lip, forcing back a sob. She could guess what Rosalie's state meant for the fate of her vine-haired friend. It seems at least one of you were able to reach a hostage. How amusing, Osoiek continued, the mask synthesizer making it impossible to discern whether or not the psychopath was being sarcastic or not. As one who holds value in one's words, I won't kill you. That earned a snort from the cornered redhead. Such a petty sense of honor was utterly revolting. Taking a chance, the heroine in training turned back around and looked out the window, half expecting to see Hatsum intercepted and recaptured. To her surprise, she watched as the Pinkette reached the gate and effortlessly escaped. She'd won. Nothing else mattered now. It's over, Osoiek, Itsuka said, bitter confidence filling her with pitched strength she knew was as empty as the satisfaction she felt. You've lost. Is that so? Itsuka snapped to attention, finding that the mastermind had somehow gotten right next to her without her noticing. The psychopath ignored her, taking in the sight of the now open gate. You say that after helping me further my plans so graciously? Itsuka only just managed to keep from stumbling back against the windowsill. She had to bite her tongue to keep from asking for an explanation. This was only the last words of a doomed villain, digging for one last victory before utter defeat. The mastermind regarded the redhead for a moment before a low, warped chuckle forced its way through his mask. Ah, perhaps you haven't figured it out yet then? The words weren't spoken as a question. Itsuka glared in silent response. Osoiek sighed. And here I believed you were trying to appeal to me so that I would give you the antidote. Itsuka couldn't restrain herself any longer. Antidote? The word tasted like ash on the redhead's tongue. For what? For the deadly supervirus you just unleashed onto the world, of course, Osoiek answered, serenely gesturing toward the gate Hatsum had just escaped through. Itsuka paled. There was no way. He couldn't be serious? I monitored each and every one of you to see who would be the perfect vessel to carry my retribution to All Might and the other self-proclaimed heroes out there, Osoiek began, sounding just like a stereotypical monologue villain. Only 2 of you showed the required qualifications. And wouldn't you know it, you came along and so kindly assisted in delivering one of them straight to the big man himself. The mastermind turned to stare right into the despairing gaze of Itsuka Kendo. The redhead saw only her own reflection in the supervillain's lenses, an ironic recrimination for unwittingly aiding a psychopath in killing the symbol of peace. And no. Itsuka took a step back, only to trip and fall into the very chair Hatsum had occupied only minutes ago. "You're lying." Even as she spoke the empty words, the redhead knew she was only denying the truth. She tried with every ounce left of her will to bend reality to fit the image of a defeated villain pulling a last-ditch scam, but it made sense. They'd all been gassed. They'd all then no doubt gone through incredibly taxing physical activity fighting Osoiek's subordinates. Those same subordinates had all worn sealed masks. Objectively, it really was such an easy way to monitor the effectiveness of a bioweapon. Infect your unsuspecting test subjects, and watch them die as they think they're surviving. She'd been such a fool. By the time Itsuka was able to pull herself out of her self-hatred, she realized she'd been tied to the hostage chair. The furniture piece had been reoriented so that the redhead was now facing the door to the room. There was a new addition to the once empty cell though. A complex set of ropes and hooks had been jury-rigged together, ultimately linked to a shotgun. A shotgun pointed directly at her chest. "What are you doing?" Itsuka snarled out of reflex, perhaps expecting the supervillain to have actually kept his word. "I thought you said." "I am a man of honor, I assure you," Osoiek said, walking by the bound heroine in training as if she no longer mattered. "I won't kill you." Rosalie, or was that Sela, stepped forward and forced a gag into the captive class president's mouth. Itsuka tried to scream, but no sound of worth made it through. "It's a pity, you know?" Osoiek continued, waiting for his subordinates to leave the room before grabbing the door's knob. "If you'd been only a fraction of a percentage more fascinating, I would have given you the opportunity to join me. Just like I did one of your classmates." The hardly veiled insult earned a look of true horror from the now struggling heroine in training. "Oh well," Osoiek lamented flippantly, stopping just before closing the door. The mastermind pulled out a device from his coat, a recorder. "I guess I'll just let one of your other classmates do my dirty work for me this time." With those parting words, the supervillain pressed play on the recorder, Itsuka soon recognizing the projected sounds of panic and pain as her own. That bastard had recorded her when she'd panicked at the pool, before her capture. Wait. What was that thrashing, crashing coming from outside? Oh God. Oh no. Outside the room. Tetsu had literally been charging through the length of ground Gamma, blinded by inconsolate rage, like a steel bull in a concrete china shop. He'd chased Sela from the moment he'd been able to stand, smashing through windows, walls, doors, you name it. The steely teen couldn't stop, wouldn't stop, until he had the head of the bastard who'd killed his classmates, his friends, in his own 2 hands. Nothing mattered besides vengeance for the wrongfully dead. Sela. The scream, war cry, roar all rolled into one reverberated through Tetsu's head once more. He could feel his anger increase every second. He'd almost caught the bastard too many times to count, only for the villain to slip away with a taunt in a language he couldn't understand. It was maddening. Finally, the chase had taken the steely teen here, to this building. He'd followed the murderer's trail all the way to this floor. He ran down a random hallway, breaking doors open as he ran. There was no way. Gah! A familiar voice, twisted in pain, instantly knocked Tetsu from his rage. "Leave me alone." "Kendo ne?" Tetsu muttered, revenge and villains gone from his thoughts for the moment. "No." There was no doubt in the steely teen's mind. That terrified scream was Kendo's. And it was coming from behind that door, right there. Tetsu refused to hesitate, not ever again. Quirk activated, the hero in training fully intended to keep any more friends from dying at the hands of these bastard villains. Grabbing the door's knob, the steely teen threw it open with such strength the flimsy forward was torn apart, hinges and all. Boom! It happened in a split second, but it might as well have been an eternity for Tetsu. Before he could react, a shotgun fired right into the chest of his class president and honorary big sister. The force of the shot threw Kendo backwards, chair and all. Numb, Tetsu took in the sight of the bloody corpse of Class 1B's big sister. Belatedly, the steely teen noticed the unmanned weapon had been tied to topes that had once led to the door. The door he'd destroyed on his way in. It hit him like a freight train. He'd just killed Kendo. Him. Not a villain. Him. Unable to cope, Tetsu fell to his knees. Too shocked to think, the steely teen's quirk deactivated on its own. He couldn't take his eyes off her, his dead classmate. He'd done that. His hot-bloodedness, which he'd always taken such pride in, had killed the kindest, most understanding, intelligent, and all-around best big sister a knucklehead like him could have asked for. Wrapped in his guilt and grief, Tetsu hardly noticed the villains now standing around him. He definitely didn't notice Sela as the murderer he'd been hunting in the first place stepped up behind him. The villain raised familiar dual batons, sparks flying. The electrified weapons came down. And the video paused. The lights of the classroom popped on without a sound, revealing the entirety of Class 1B, alive and in their seats, looking as if they'd been beaten to within an inch of their lives. Most of them were covered in a sticky blood-red substance that looked and even smelled like the real deal. A few of the more unlucky heroes in training still had pieces of intestine sticking to them, which upon closer inspection weren't actually real either. Each and every member of Class 1B looked thoroughly chastised and humiliated. So, does anyone here still feel ready to go head-to-head with real villains? Vlad King's rhetorical question had all the connotations of the beginning of a long lecture. The students flinched. It looked like they weren't out of the woods yet. A sinister lesson. Baru Azui, matriarch of the Azui family and boogeywoman of even the most affluent of quirkists and/or corrupt white-collars, had long striven to earn the reputation that preceded her nowadays. The frog woman had willingly given her blood, sweat, and tears to build her firm into a pillar of the fight for equality, racking up various achievements along the way that she was still proud of even years later. Her storied experiences had built within the mother of three a fortitude that allowed her to handle anything and everything that life could throw at her, from the mundane to the most bizarre. And then something like this happened, and Baru was reminded why she tried to stay humble more often than not. I'm still completely against this, Baru-chan. It's outrageous. Inko Midoriya, matriarch of what remained of the Midoriya family, was neither the boogeywoman of anybody nor had as of yet any reputation to speak of beyond that of a concerned mother. But, what the slightly older woman was riled, unbelievably so. In truth, it was only the fact that the two friends were sitting outside at a public coffeehouse that kept her from exploding in righteous fury. My baby is not a villain, Inko hissed, glaring at the passing waiter who'd gotten just a little too nosy. There's not a single bad bone in his body. Without looking at her irate friend, Baru launched her tongue out and kept the knife and fork in front of the woman from launching into the air. Inko had barely twitched her hand that time, and her currently ruby eyes hadn't even flicked to the errant silverware before it had started moving. These work breaks were supposed to be relaxing, a bit of tea between two mothers who had quickly become fast friends through their children. But now Baru could hardly look at her fellow Verdunette. I completely agree, the frog woman replied, eyeing her drink and once again refusing to direct her full attention toward her supposedly older friend and her bubbling ire. When her daughter's boyfriend had revealed that he'd used his blood to heal his mother, the teen had failed to mention that his quirk hadn't been able to differentiate between injury and wear and tear. Looking back, Baru decided a lesson in what qualified as pertinent information was in order for the boy. When he'd said fully healed, Izuku had really meant fully healed. Over the course of the rest of the week, Inko had undergone a metamorphosis. Where once the single mother could have been safely described as homely and plump, now anyone who didn't already know the woman would have been hard-pressed to believe she'd ever borne a child at all. It was incredible. It was unbelievable. It was maddening. I mean, just look at me. Inko continued, hardly taking a breath and completely missing the fact that her audience of one had yet to fully look at her. He healed me and I haven't been this healthy in 15 years. It took an inhuman effort, but Baru just managed to contain the grunt of irritation that threatened to escape her at that remark. It wasn't Inko's fault that time had seemingly turned back for her with absolutely no repercussions. She wouldn't be jealous that this is what it took for her friend to recover from her extreme heart condition. I understand. Baru repeated for probably the umpteenth time, resigned to the fact that it was useless anyway. Consoling Inko, and stomping on her own envy, unfortunately took a back seat to the truly important matter at hand. Her friend's miraculous recovery came with all sorts of implications attached that she needed time to digest and plan for. The legal shitstorm alone was going to be tantamount to a super typhoon. It was only a matter of time before the truth of Izuku's quirk became public knowledge, and not in the sense that it was right now. Currently, the media had actually been absurdly useful and done an excellent job of hiding the green-haired teen's true potential behind a smokescreen of fear-mongering and hype. They'd been lucky so far that zombie girls and mind control sold better than the truth even on a good day. Inko, however, was now living proof that her son's quirk was much more than met the eye. Izuku's healing capabilities were, quite frankly, frighteningly powerful. Just thinking of the list of unscrupulous individuals who would be gunning to press the young hero in training into their service made Baru shiver. I wonder how my baby is holding up. Inko trailed off, maternal rage appearing to finally start to flag. The idea of her Izuku even playing the part of a villain was just too much for the single mother to imagine. I hope the other students don't hurt him during this goddamn test. Baru flinched, both at the thought and her friend's coarse language. The frog woman knew, both from her daughter and a frank discussion with Nizu, that the green-haired cinnamon roll was not entirely defenseless, but still. And it wasn't like Izuku was entirely alone either. Class 1B was going to have to work for their victory if they hoped to defeat their opponent this time. Later, UA, ground gamma. Pain. Itsuka Kendo sat up with a ragged gasp, lungs clawing for oxygen despite the sharp sting that flared across her ribs at the jarring action. For a moment, the red-headed heroine in training could only blink in utter shock. She wasn't dead? What? What? Itsuka grunted, looking down at her dirty hands and ruined costume. What happened? Her throat was too dry, her lungs too empty. But the class president of 1B would be damned if those sensations didn't feel like ambrosia in that moment. She was alive. And exactly where she'd started. Gingerly looking around, Itsuka recognized where she was. She was sitting, on the ground, in the center of the intersection where everything had gone wrong. And as she took in the familiar sight, the stupefied redhead felt the weight on her shoulders fall away. All around her, battered, bloody, and in some cases bawling, were her classmates. Every single one. Waha! The sight of Shiozaki crying and sobbing into Jiroda Shishida's large, blood-covered form only made Itsuka smile warmly, glad to see her vine-haired sister-in-arms alive and well. If she'd had the energy, the redhead might have even laughed. Poor Jiroda hardly looked like he knew what to do with himself. It's okay, Iba-chan, Jiroda soothed, using one arm to hug the sobbing heroine in training to him while using the hand of the other to kite through the young woman's vine-like hair, thankfully now sandsthorns. I'm not going anywhere. The uncharacteristic behavior from Shiozaki hardly drew an eye, too many others too by finding their friends and classmates still alive to comment. In fact, Itsuka could see that many others were just as wrapped up in their affirmations. Reiko was unsurprisingly pressed into Juzo's back from the looks of it, Monoma was, apologizing, to Kamakiri, and even Tetsutetsu had wrapped Pony in a manly hug that came with plenty of tears on both sides. From what Itsuka could see, copious amounts of what appeared to be blood, guts, and dirt covered almost every student. But, battered and bruised as they were, none of them were dead, or dying, so that was all right with her. Any sense of joy, however, was soon tempered by the weight of reality once more came bearing down on Class 1B's president. Was it all just a test? Groaning, Itsuka painfully got to her feet, hands shooting to her aching chest as she felt the tattered material covering it pull tightly. Taking a look at the damage, the redhead was glad to see there were no embarrassingly large tears in her costume, just a few rips and a lot of red-colored syrup. Brain finally beginning to wake up, Itsuka felt a sense of vertigo hit her as every missing dot and puzzle piece suddenly clicked into place. It had all been an act. It was the only explanation. She couldn't have survived a shotgun-blasted chest, with no open injuries and clothes intact, and only been covered in fake blood otherwise. Class 1B's president was suddenly torn. Soul-shaking relief at knowing everyone had always been alright and no villain had won ward with the humiliation of realizing her entire class had flopped so hard they'd probably be used as a case study for generations to come. As you can see, the low chatter that had begun to rise through the awakening 1B students died instantly at the sound of Osoiek's synthesized voice. Itsuka felt her blood freeze in her veins. All of the Mishi are here, safe and somewhat sound. Itsuka, and many of her classmates, snapped around, taking in the sight of the reigning mastermind behind their harrowing test standing just off to the side. Was it just her, or had the faux supervillain shrunk? The redhead could have sworn he'd been taller. Never doubted it, came the tightly controlled response of Vlad King, the pro standing side by side with the faux supervillain. I just didn't think the results would be so poor. Class 1B collectively winced. No doubt there was a long lecture and punishment in their near future if Kansensei's tone was any indication. Did you truly expect them to win? Osoiek asked, solemn as ever, they are but first years. Do not judge too harshly. Itsuka noticed that many of her classmates shrunk away from the insensitive sympathy that came from their tormentor. The words, while seemingly kind, just felt like another nail in the coffin most of 1B felt closing in on them. Their masked adversary, who could only be a hardened foreign pro-hero, felt pity for them they'd performed so badly. I'm not, Vlad King answered, causing more than a few of the Sylvette students to flinch. But when even your so-called star students fail like what I just saw. The tusked man didn't bother finishing his comment, his meaning clear enough. Itsuka dipped her head in shame, knowing exactly who was being referred to. Their class had 2 recommendation students, several combat specialists, a self-styled Machiavellian scholar, and her, a supposedly born-to-lead heroine in the making. Kansensei had every right to be disappointed in them. There is always a next time, Osoiek said plainly, seemingly unwilling to argue for 1B again. The foreigner's words brought more dread than hope to the defeated students. the idea of going through the ordeal they just survived again caused a shiver to pass through the crowd. "We'll see," Vlad King groused, controlled disdain seeping out. Osowiec sighed, the synthesized noise grating on the ears of those who just spent the worst afternoon of their lives under the pro's care. The masked foreigner turned away, and Itsuka was frustrated to realize that simple act in itself allowed her body to subconsciously relax just a little bit more. What was she, a child? "I would give a full report in person," Osowiec said, stepping down the deserted faux city street, "but I must be going. My Tavarashi are waiting." Of course, Vlad King acknowledged, quick to agree that the foreign pro was no longer needed and could return to his duties. "Have a safe trip." Itsuka felt a twinge of guilt that she hoped whichever country their adversary had come from was far away. Das Vidania. And just like that, the man who'd beating the entirety of UA's Class 1B into the ground, and made it look easy, disappeared. Another shiver spread through the gathered students. What kind of supervillain would require that man's intervention? It was a scary thought. Same time, UA, principal's office. Nizu, the super genius principal of Japan's most prestigious academy for training the future generations of the country's heroes, was laughing his furry ass off. In fact, the dog, mouse, bear, thing was laughing so hard he looked incredibly undignified for one in his position. The high-class mannerisms and dignified persona the quirked animal normally affected were nowhere to be seen, instead replaced by an unbound childish glee. It had been glorious. Class 1B's test had kept Nizu's attention the entire time, and he'd loved every second of it. In his honest opinion, the entire scenario had been an absolute success. Everyone had benefited after all. While Kansan students had received a trial on par with Class 1A's USJ debacle to test their mettle against, they'd also been shown just how dangerous the hero profession could be, what their weak points were, and had their antagonistic impulses curb-stomped into the dirt before they caused any more trouble. The lessons they'd learned the hard way today would hopefully never be forgotten, and that was a blessing in disguise. And if some decided to drop the heroics course? Well, that was just fine too. Aizawa-san wasn't the only one who believed that cutting those only fooling themselves was the better option. Some people just weren't suited to be the best heroes Japan deserved. It wouldn't even be that big of an issue for the school either really. His legalese had, in the past, proved sufficient in mitigating the majority of public outcry when tests like this were held previously. And students and their families were required to sign special waivers specifically crafted for those interested in becoming heroes. Each and every one had been properly informed as to the rigorous and oftentimes harsh methods UA employed when teaching its prospects. And harsh they were. Class 1B had been pushed through a blatantly traumatic event, there was no doubt about it, but it still wasn't anything beyond what the school had been approved for. Not even the most vindictive of parents could sue them for today when what the second and third years were exposed to made today's hardship pale in comparison. After all, no one was in any actual danger. "Oh. This needs to go into the archives, there will be case studies, I just know it." Nizu murmured as he wrote a memo. The footage he'd recorded needed to be slightly edited here and there in his opinion. In fact, this should really become the basis for our second year's final exam. The principal giggled, beady eyes flicking from the video files to the script that had been written up for the test. The quirked animal's jolly mood soured slightly. Midoriya had written the rough draft of the exam, a majority of which had only needed tweaking in the end, but as he'd feared, the young hero in training had originally been too kind. At first, the green-haired teen had proposed playing a student gone rogue, one who kidnapped classmates from the support course and would then pit Class 1B against increasingly difficult traps and escape puzzles. Nizu had had to put a stop to that immediately. While the script had been solid, and the young necromancer had meant well, there were two glaring problems with his first attempt. His identity would be known, and hatred and mistrust toward his person would skyrocket, and the situation wasn't dire enough for their needs. Neither of these were issues the principal could allow to stand. After much debate back and forth, and young Azui needing to step in and remind Midoriya that this was all for Class 1B's own good, the Verdinet had sat down and come up with his masterpiece. Masks, misdirection, and bioweapons. By the grace of some sadistic god, Midnight and Hound Dog had caught wind of their efforts soon after that, and had immediately begged, in not so many words, to be allowed to help. The addition of psychological warfare, courtesy of UA's counselor and resident dominatrix, ramped the test up to plus ultra. Then the only snag had been who would wear the mask. The door to Nizu's office swung open and a shock of blonde hair set over deep-set brows poked in. "Mr. Principal, 1B's proctors are here," Toshinori announced gravely, the man's emaciated body giving the quirked animal's guests plenty of room to enter around. A veritable small army stepped around the deflated pro-hero and entered without missing a beat. The blonde skeleton tried to hide how much that bothered him. Sorry for intruding. Osoiek's deep, synthesized voice filled the relatively small office as the masked man finally stepped inside. The mastermind came to a stop directly in front of Nizu, his entourage coming to flank him on both sides. The quirked animal had to admit, the sight would have been intimidating had he not known who he was looking at. That being the case, the principal only smiled lightly at the new arrivals. That's perfectly all right, don't worry about it at all, Nizu said, signaling to Toshinori that he may leave and close the door behind him. The skeletal blonde frowned, but did as directed. The test didn't turn out too difficult to pull off, I hope? Instead of an immediate response, Osoiek seemed to take a moment to consider how to phrase a proper answer. And as good as he liked to think his skills at reading others was, Nizu quickly found he couldn't read the masked man at all through his cover's reflective lenses. Fortunately, there wouldn't be a need for him to, as at that moment, Osoiek reached around and gripped the sides of his mask. Seeing their leader's actions, the other disguised individuals in the room were quick to imitate him. Actually, it was the mask's locking mechanism released with a hiss, curly green locks instantly spilling into view, a lot harder than I'd originally thought it would be. When the plans had been finalized, down to the third contingency, it had been Midoriya who'd stepped forward, adamant on being the one to don the mask. It had shocked and confused many of the faculty involved with 1B's test, but Nizu understood why the troubled green-haired teen had taken the role. Midoriya hadn't had a bone to pick with members of his sister class, he hadn't even wanted to be the villain at all, but, deep in his heart, a stalwart determination had been born. Izuku Midoriya wouldn't allow anyone else to carry such a burden if he could help it. The way the young hero in training saw it, the weight of becoming 1B's personal boogeyman was no heavier than the stigma he'd already shouldered throughout his life. Was it naive? Perhaps. But Nizu had been hard-pressed to contain the pride he'd felt as the green-haired teen had explained himself. Hopefully this won't need to happen again, Karo, Tsuyu Azui said, unclasping her mask and allowing her bundled hair to cascade down her back. Those guys won't be the only ones left with nightmares about this. A derisive snort came from beside the amphibious teen as the figure next to her removed their mask as well. Blonde hair with colored highlights poured into the air as Saki Nikaido's face was revealed. I for one wouldn't mind giving those brats a follow-up. The delinquent zombie girl snarked, grinning in satisfaction. The shortest of the four surrounding Midoriya violently shook their head as they pried their mask off. Lily thinks Aizu and I shouldn't do that again, Lily protested, pouting adorably when she eventually managed to remove her disguise. That suit isn't cool or cute at all. Aha! The heavily modulated groan pulled everyone's attention to the last member of the group, the only one who had yet to reveal themselves. Snapping to attention, Izuku quickly moved to assist his first partner in removing her mask. While the green-haired teen was busy with taking care of Tei, Nizu watched on with a sad smile. The young hero in training had earned himself a true victory today, but it had come at a cost. Midoriya might have accepted that his sister class needed a reality check, but defeating them so completely had opened the Verdunette's eyes to his own sinister potential. Now, there was undeniable proof that he could take down a group of heroes if push came to shove. Nizu hoped that nothing ever caused the teen in front of him to snap. You did your sister class a great service today, Midoriya-kun, the principal said suddenly, regaining the attention of those present. The quirked animal didn't fail to notice how glassy Izuku's eyes had become. Never forget that what you taught them today might just save their lives someday in the future. Izuku stared back, looking hard for something in the principal's beady eyes. When he refused to move any further, Tsuyu placed a hand on the Verdunette's shoulder, breaking the staring contest before it could drag on too long. Sighing, the heroes in training shared a soft gaze before nodding solemnly. They would have to trust that Nizu was right, that all they'd done to help their fellow students grow. The quirked animal clapped his paws together, glad to see the two were still supporting each other as much as he'd hoped they would. Successful hero teams were always so gratifying to see bloom, not to mention fascinating. Now, Nizu said, moving business along, please change out of your costumes and back into your uniforms. Those suits need to be returned to the support department for repairs and study. Izuku and Tsuyu paused, looks of confusion furrowing the duo's brows. The principal snorted in amusement. They proved to come in handy, wouldn't you say? Nizu remarked. A thoughtful look sparked to life in Midoriya's eyes, and the quirked animal pushed on to head off any muttering storm before it could form. I think I'll take the opportunity to step out for a moment, maybe grab some coffee. It wouldn't do for a teacher to be in the room when students are changing after all. But please, do try to keep anything improper from happening in my absence if you would. The green duo blushed hard enough to give strawberries a run for their money at the request, but neither complained. Shy nods were the last thing Nizu saw before the quirked animal closed his office doors behind him. I can't believe he said that, Izuku murmured after a moment, staring at where the principal had been with a look of bashfulness still coloring his cheeks. Shaking his head, the green-haired teen began to unclasp the buckles that kept his Osoiek costume on. Luckily it wouldn't take too long to get it off. I'm surprised he didn't say worse, Karo, Tsuyu countered. The amphibious teen once again thankful for the lessons her mother had taught her as a child, being able to recover from the unexpected or embarrassing quickly had served her well over the years. Although, the sound of cloth rustling and falling to the ground beside him pulled Izuku from his thoughts as surely as a villain attack would have. Suddenly shaking, the Verdunette slowly turned to the source of the suggestive sound. The sight that greeted the hero in training's eyes would have surely given him a heart attack if his body had been capable of such a thing. Tsuyu had managed to undress down to her bra and panties in seconds without him noticing. And he had just pulled off his shirt after removing his trench coat. The image of his girlfriend half-naked seared itself into Izuku's brain. The light from Nizu's desk lamp cast a warm glow over the frog girl's figure, highlighting just how curvaceous her maturing body had already become. The green material of her underwear contrasted beautifully against Tsuyu's porcelain skin as well, and as the star-struck Verdunette finally managed to drag his eyes upward, he witnessed an adorable blush settle onto her cheeks as well just before he got to her eyes. Izuku froze. Internally, Tsuyu was freaking out. She knew she'd made it a habit to speak and act her mind, but this was almost too bold even for her. She hadn't even asked Izuku to turn around. What if he thought she was a pervert? What if she'd pushed too hard and he got uncomfortable with her because of this? The frog girl could feel her confidence bleed away as she stared back at her boyfriend. Why did he look so good without a shirt on? Tsuyu froze. The two hormonally charged teens might have stood ogling each other forever, had it not been for the eventual intervention of the undead present. Ugh, would you two fuck already? Saki grouched, sneering as her boss and his woman made eyes at each other. The green duo might have been strong and deserving of respect, but the blonde zombie girl hated it when they acted all weak and hesitant around each other. It made her sick. She didn't remember having this much trouble when she'd been alive and couldn't understand what their issue was. Gnana. RRRRNNNGH. They are not. Saki shouted back at Tei's defensive groans. I was younger than them when I had my first guy, and you don't see me freaking out over a little bare skin. Between the groaning, shouting, and Saki's disturbing comment, Izuku and Tsuyu snapped out of their daze, looking away from each other with burning cheeks. Backs now turned, the two heroes in training focused on getting changed without further issue. The duo also felt slightly guilty. They shouldn't have been so wrapped up in each other with Lily in the room. Neither wanted to think about how their actions might have impacted the littlest zombie girl, but both hoped she wouldn't develop further PTSD because of them. As soon as Izuku had finished butchering his tie, the green-haired teen jumped to helping Tei change, Tsuyu turning to gently assist Lily after pulling up her black knee-highs. Keeping their attention away from the other and centered on helping the others of their group allowed both teens the time to cool off and collect themselves. It was mutually appreciated. After that, it didn't take long before the entire team was once again dressed in their regular attire. Hey guys, Izuku said, pausing with the last piece of his Osoieg gear, the iron mask, in his hand. We did the right thing, right? The Verdunette's voice wavered, regret plain to hear even to the most emotionally blind. The hero in training had been shaken by the actions he'd taken during the test, but it was only now that his repressed emotions managed to overflow. Tears trailed down freckled cheeks as the Izuku couldn't help but sniffle slightly. Looks aside, the green-haired teen hadn't begun to doubt the reasoning behind the test. In his heart of hearts, Izuku just wanted reassurance that the feeling of satisfaction burning in his chest was merely the result of a job well done in helping his peers grow as heroes, not the byproduct of retaliatory vindication. Da boss! Saki shouted, quick to throw her answer out. Those idiots needed a lesson. Maybe now they'll think twice before asking to jump straight into the fire. Perhaps not the best wording, but it was enough for the others to springboard off of. Karo! Tsuyu croaked, in full support. With the experience one begot today, they'll be able to work on their weaknesses and get better faster. Izuku beamed. The instant support from his girlfriend and partner was a balm on his soul. The green-haired teen thanked whatever deity was watching over him for their steadfast support. Lily knows Izunai has a kind heart. Lily cheered, bubbling with enthusiastic energy. Everything Izunai does helps people. The heartfelt honesty of the littlest zombie girl touched Izuku, the hero in training giving the Bluinet headpats without even thinking as his eyes filled with tears yet again. Guru? Tei groaned, causing Izuku to chuckle. Of course, he'd never had a reason to believe otherwise, had he? Thanks guys, I really needed that, Izuku said, the confession further lightening his soul as he turned back to the task of putting away the iron mask he still held. Looking down, something in the empty black lenses caught the green-haired teen's eye. The lenses weren't empty. Staring back at Izuku were two glowing red irises. Izuku felt his heart stutter, his lungs squeeze shut. The burning coals within the lenses gave the mask the appearance of a true face. The grim visage gazed forward, fixated on the young hero in training before it. Never forget. Izuku flinched at the words spoken directly to his very bones. They rattled through him, leaving a feeling of surprised dread in their wake. What had his cursed blood been attempting to tell him? Izuku-in? Kero, Tsuyu called out, breaking her boyfriend from the suddenly far too serious countenance he'd fallen into. The green-haired teen jerked back to reality with a gasp. Ha! Oh, sorry Tsuchan, Izuku said, doing his best to shake off his dread and panicked thoughts. My quirk. It just said something to me. I think. At first, Izuku had been afraid. Explaining to Tsuyu and their mothers what had happened in the hospital bathroom right before he'd healed Inko had taken a leap of faith. Instead of fear and disgust, the cinnamon roll had been rewarded with support and understanding. The issue hadn't been with him or his quirk at all. Sentient quirks weren't so rare that they were undocumented, of course. In fact, there were quite a number used by pro-heroes over the years that even the most obtuse in hero knowledge could name. No, the issue had been with the QRA. If Izuku's quirk turned out to be self-aware, and it was entirely possible that it was given what he'd experienced, then what Inko and Baru feared more was what the agency would try to do with that information. For the time being, the four had agreed that the truth of cursed blood needed to be kept under wraps for as long as possible. What did it say? Tsuyu asked, hugging her boyfriend from behind. As she did so, the frog girl purposefully wrapped her arms around the verdinette, pressing her ample breasts against his muscled back. Izuku blushed at the contact, but refused to shy away. He actually, kind of liked it. It told me to never forget, the hero in training said, leaning back slightly. Tsuyu rested her head on the now reachable shoulder. What do you think that means? It could have meant any number of things, but Tsuyu knew what her boyfriend was really asking. The frog girl had stood beside her hero long enough, had seen the damage society had done to him, to know the demons he fought. It hurt her heart to think about, but Izuku needed reassurance and affirmation. He needed to be told that the origins of his actions were his own and that their nature was good. He needed encouragement to believe that his quirk could have positive outlets. Thankfully, she wasn't the only one who supported her cinnamon roll. Never forget how much of a badass you are. Never forget how kind you are. Guha. The cries of Saki, Lily, and Tei respectively earned a grateful chuckle from the verdant necromancer. Never forget. Tsuyu added, pecking the cheek closest to her, that you are a good boy. A good boy? Izuku asked, blushing up a storm again. While unused to such a level of intimacy, the green-haired teen couldn't deny he already felt a hunger for more. A good boy, Tsuyu repeated, this time giving her boyfriend a chaste kiss on the lips. Izuku opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by another kiss. Completely by accident, the two teens felt their tongues touch, and the kiss quickly began to evolve. Knock. Knock. Bam. Izuku and Tsuyu jumped apart faster than the blink of an eye, just in time for Mei Hatsum to barge into the room with only the smallest regard for personal privacy. I'm here for the gear. Mei shouted as she burst in, an overzealous grin splitting the pinkette's face. The death glares of three zombie girls hardly dimmed the support student's smile by a watt. Am I interrupting something? At that moment, Izuku honestly wasn't sure. It was the principal's office after all? Later, UA, Class 1A homeroom. What happened? Izuku and Tsuyu were greeted with a shocking sight when they returned to their classmates. Every member of Class 1A was battered, bruised, and looked dead tired as if they'd just been through a war zone. If he didn't know better, the verdinette would have said his peers had just survived a repeat of the USJ incident. They all succeeded in passing their tests, Aizawa replied gruffly, eyeing his class's green duo. A thin brow rose at the teens' nearly impeccable appearances. Although not as rationally as you two it seems. That, of course, had the entirety of 1A staring intently at the couple. Grrrrrrrr. Only for a reminder from Tei to then have them rethink their actions. Izuku sighed, but was glad that Nizu had agreed to his request to allow the rest of the staff teaching UA's first years to know about his and Tsuchan's involvement in 1B's test. Hopefully Aizawa-sensei had made up some excuse as to their absence and given a reason as to why they were taking their exam separately. Sit you two, class is starting, Aizawa ordered. The gruff teacher wanted to move things along quickly. Certain students didn't need time to think up questions to ask the verdinette duo about their secret test. Today's exam was meant to complete the mandated recovery protocol that was initiated after the USJ incident. Passing meant you were ready to continue down the path of heroics, failing would see you drop down to general studies and given further evaluation. A collective shudder shot through the spines of the battered members of Class 1A. Once again a number of them had dodged expulsion from the hero course by the skin of their teeth. The manic grin their homeroom teacher was giving them only heightened the sense of dread that permeated the room. As unlikely as it seemed, you all proved today that your potential hasn't been extinguished, Aizawa said. As the pro kept his class's focus, Izuku, Tsuyu, and the zombie girls took the chance to return to their seats. As he sat down, the young necromancer pulled out a notebook and readied himself to take notes. However, certain performances were only borderline acceptable, and make no mistake, that means there are double the expectations moving forward. If Izuku noticed that his homeroom teacher seemed to glare at something over his shoulder while speaking that last warning, he didn't say anything even as he heard Mineta whimper behind him. "We aren't pulling any punches anymore, understand?" Aizawa said, glancing around the room. The rigidity of the students staring back at him almost made the pro-hero smile. "You've proven you can handle it, but don't get cocky." 1B completely failed their exam today, after pushing and pushing for more. It only took a team of 5 proctors to take down all 20 of them. Gasps filled the room, murmurs of shock and incredulity following. Ida shot to his feet, hand spearing through the air. "Aizawa-sensei, how is that possible? Is our sister class all right?" The gruff teacher sighed at the speedster's earnestness. Even as good as he'd been feeling recently, he still didn't think he'd be able to match such exuberance. "They're fine," Aizawa said, motioning for Ida to sit down. They were split up into groups and given a 2-prong assignment: rescue hostages and take care of a bioweapon. The proctors were the villains, and were given leave to act as such. Inside of an hour each and every one had either panicked, been beaten, or gotten captured, if not all 3. Izuku and Tsuyu quickly found themselves wishing that a hole would open up under their desks and swallow them up. The green duo silently sunk deeper into their seats, praying that none of their classmates would ever discover they'd been the proctors in question. "Man, that sounds brutal. They acted like real villains? Holy shit. That sounds way too cruel." While these and many other comments flew across the room, Izuku felt the side-eyed stares of Kyuka and Fumikage burning into his right side. The two obviously knew of his involvement in the test, seeing as how they'd participated in his intimidation videos, but the green-haired teen still worried. How had the gothic rock duo taken the news about how villainous he'd become after they'd agreed to help him? Were they still his friends now that they knew? Meanwhile, UA, Class 1B homeroom. "So, does anyone here still feel ready to go head-to-head with real villains?" Vlad King stared blankly at his still battered and trembling students, taking in the downturned looks of humility, embarrassment, frustration, and exhaustion. Seeing their poor performance from a third-person perspective had hit 1B almost harder than the original exam. From an objective angle, everything had been much clearer, including their failures. All of the blood had been fake, the entrails synthetic. In the aftermath of deaths such as Shishida's, convenient prep packs could be seen having been left behind, the logo of the Help Us company clear as day to see. The cameras, some equipped with night vision, had also showed that cheap party trinkets had been the culprits behind the sickening snapping of necks and breaking of backs. In the moment, full of fear and adrenaline and rage, it had all seemed completely real. Low lighting and their own minds, poisoned from the start by their assailants' introduction video, had proven to be far greater enemies than any of the proctors could have been. 1B had witnessed, down to the last detail, how their boastful confidence had been undermined and their terror played upon. Snapping necks? Spines being audibly twisted and crushed? In the light of day, none of the defeated students could believe they'd ever accepted such incredibly unrealistic sounds as being real. Electrocution? Such a death nowadays required high enough voltage that burn marks would have been left behind, not just spasming and a collapse. Only the trick with the faux intestines had been seen as even moderately forgivable in the eyes of the chastised 1B. None of them had taken a proper anatomy class as of yet, so their inability to tell the difference between real or fake, especially in the high-stress environment they'd been in, shouldn't be held against them. Too bad their teacher didn't see it that way. "I am severely disappointed in what I saw today," Vlad King said lowly, anger boiling beneath the calm exterior he'd raised during the video playback. "Going off on your own? Charging headfirst? Abandoning teammates?" Itsuka curled into herself harder. The redhead knew that last one was directed at her. She should have known better. She should have kept her team together, backed up Juzo instead of fleeing like a heartless, headless chicken. Why did none of you think to check your fallen comrades? Do your classmates, your friends, really mean that little to you? Vlad King continued, brow furrowing. Is the first sign of danger all it takes to break you? Shishida, who up to that point had made a valiant effort to take the criticisms head-on, finally bowed his head in shame. Shiozaki actually whimpered. The two realized now that they'd been absolute idiots, letting their panic control them into making the worst of mistakes. The beastly teen knew his quirk would have allowed him to sense Kurwaro's vitals had he thought to check. He'd used such a technique for years. The vine-haired teen internally recoiled even as her face showed no change, her memory of her pathetic aversion to touching a classmate's corpse causing her self-hatred to burn all the hotter. On the other side of the classroom, Monoma and Setsuna slumped further in their chairs. What had they been thinking? Their arrogance and stupidity had been made glaringly obvious in the playback. And don't get me started on your... I'm sorry. The outburst, no doubt heard through the wall over in 1A, was just enough to give Vlad King pause. The Sylvette glared at the culprit, who jumped to his feet with blazing eyes and a face so serious the pro-hero was actually willing to hear him out. That is, he wasn't just going to complain about unfairness or the harsh reprimanding. Tetsu, with all eyes squarely on him, bowed low. I'm sorry. The steely teen repeated, the roar still as loud as it was heartfelt. I'm sorry that my stupidity and arrogance hurt you all. My lack of thinking caused so much suffering. I'm sorry. The apology from the class's manliest metal man snapped 1B awake. Tetsu was right, they were all to blame. They'd asked for everything they'd just been through. It was their fault, all of theirs, that they hadn't been ready. Suddenly, Itsuka stood up. I'm sorry. The redhead shouted, bowing as well. I failed you all as your class president. I should have noticed something was off from the beginning, no, even before that. Vlad King remained silent, raising only a single brow at this development. Ken-sensei told us from the start, didn't he? Itsuka stated more than asked, raising her head to stand straight. He told us to pay attention. He told us not to get caught in the moment. He even told us how the test was going to start, exactly how it was going to start. Groans filled the air as multiple students realized how colossal their fuck-up had really been. Had the test really been explained from the start? Had they literally ignored the answer before even beginning? If you really mean that, Vlad King said, trailing off until he had everyone's attention, if you all really mean that. Then from this moment on, show me by starting to act like heroes, not kids playing at being heroes. Murmurs of agreement and acceptance bubbled through the room, a spark of hope lighting in not a few souls. The phrase, nowhere to go but up, was passed around along with, never again. Suddenly, a hand shot up. Nito Monoma had something to say. Sensei. Vlad King motioned for the subdued blonde to go ahead. The pro-hero was cautiously optimistic, it looked like the test had really worked. Sensei, Monoma repeated, blue eyes pleading, tell us, please. What's the difference between us? How can 1A come out victorious and unscathed against a horde of real villains while we were torn apart by 5 pros only acting? And just like that, Vlad King's only slightly recovered mood sunk into a lava pit of fury. The Sylvette growled menacingly, causing the front row of his class to rear back in fear. Monoma dropped into his seat, terrified. Unscathed? The blood hero roared, whirling around to click away at his desk's keyboard. A tense moment passed before the image of a certain green-haired necromancer popped onto the screen behind the enraged teacher. You all know who this is, right? A smattering of hesitant nods and whispered confirmations were the only response. And you all were given the official statement regarding his involvement in the USJ incident? More stuttering nods, although confusion began to prick at the edges of wide eyes. He was the only casualty, but that sure as hell isn't the full story, Vlad King continued, taking a deep breath. This unscathed student lost a foot, ruptured nearly every major organ he had, and most of his bones were broken or shattered. His efforts nearly killed him. Class 1B collectively trembled at the new information. They'd just seen Midoriya not too long ago. And they'd antagonized him. Izuku Midoriya suffered all of this while coming to the aid of All Might as the symbol of peace faced off against a bioengineered super soldier, Vlad King said, far from done. The Sylvette was thankful that the principal had approved the watered-down information for sharing. The pro-hero knew keeping the true scope of the incident from reaching the media was important, but also knowing that his students were at odds with the little hero had honestly been ticking him off. Class 1B were speechless, their thoughts maelstrom of corrected misconceptions, self-recrimination, grief, and shame. The monster of UA was not the evil creature they believed him to be. And before any of you go thinking that he had it easy due to being a regenerator. The warning in Vlad King's voice was enough to leaden the silence of his audience to deafening. You should know that Midoriya-san still feels every ounce of pain and injury incurs. If the students of 1B weren't shocked before, they were now. How could anyone survive that kind of trauma? Try to remember that the next time you feel like picking a fight with him. While that comment caused the majority of the class to flinch, Shiozaki, and surprisingly Monoma, shrunk away the most from the warning. Later, UAPE grounds. The school day was nearing its end, and Tei, Lily, and Saki were doing their best to relax behind the gymnasium. "This sucks ass," Saki muttered, throwing back a fist to lightly punch the wall she was resting against. The gentle tap cracked the concrete, creating a shallow crater around the blonde's hand. "Lily agrees," the littlest zombie girl said. The brunette was getting bored. Being deprived of Momone's cuddles would have been bad enough, but not having even a little of her big brother's attention felt like a cruel and unusual punishment. The PE class for 1A today had been structured to stand as merely light exercises and games for the heroes in training that day. The students were told to relax their quirks after the rigorous test they'd had and instead better their physical conditioning. That being the case, no quirk usage was being allowed, within reason. Mutant types couldn't exactly turn off their quirks. That hadn't stopped someone from complaining about the presence of the undead trio, and insisting that the zombie girls be removed to prevent distractions for the other students. When Kyuka had launched to their defense, Ojiro had helpfully pointed out that Momo wasn't able to stop petting Lily and focus. Izuku had eventually decided that arguing would only further interrupt the class's time and had reluctantly acceded to the prejudiced demands. Which led to the predicament at hand. "Why aren't you complaining too, Wonder Girl?" Saki asked the silent sister of the undead trio. Tei didn't respond, limiting herself to moving her head back and forth as if she were following something unseen behind the wall. "Lily thinks Tene is too busy watching Izuenii," Lily replied instead. The brunette took a moment herself to stare at the same space her elder was. Soon enough, the littlest zombie girl felt the familiar tug of her big brother through the concrete. Left, right, a sharp turn, jump. Whatever he was doing, hopefully it was fun. "Shut it, shrimp," Saki growled, getting annoyed. UA might have been a badass school, she'd admit, but being separated from her boss was a no-go. "And you. If you don't feel like talking." With the speed of experience, the blonde zombie girl shot into action. In no time at all, the delinquent sister had gotten the silent Ravenette into a full Nelson. Tei hardly reacted at all, merely continuing to watch Izuku through the wall. "Let's roughhouse a bit," Saki grunted, squeezing her muscles. "Like good, loving sisters." The blonde tried to wrestle her captive. No success. She tried to move her away from the wall. No success. She tried to get her attention at all. No success. No matter what Saki did, Tei didn't seem the least bit interested. Submission holds, limb twists, none of it garnered even a groan from the Ravenette. The entire time, the oldest zombie girl only stared at the wall, looking beyond the blank concrete. "Come on. Move," Saki snarled, starting to compare Tei to an elephant in her head. It shouldn't have been so hard to move her sister, but it was. "Let's fight." Off to the side, Lily looked on with concern at the two, or, it could be more correctly said, one rowdy zombie girl. "Lily doesn't like this," the brunette warned. "Lily thinks that's a bad idea." The littlest zombie girl's words went right over the head of the rebellious blonde. At this point, Saki was determined. Her pride was won the line. She'd get Tei to the ground if it was the last thing she did. "I'm going to defeat you," the delinquent shouted as soon as she noticed she was starting to make progress. Thinking that Tei was beginning to get tired of resisting, the blonde pushed harder. "And then I'll be the boss's number one." Unfortunately, on rare occasions, a straw can break a camel's back. "What are you gonna do then, huh? You won't be needed anymore, AAH." The moment Saki began whispering those words into Tei's ear, the situation changed. Tei finally reacted. The Ravenette straightened her posture, tensed her muscles, and instantly switched into attack mode. Saki, who'd still been pinning the elder zombie girl down, suddenly found herself flung into the air. The blonde hardly had half a second to comprehend something had gone wrong before her airborne momentum came to a violent halt. Tei had grasped her ankle. Mid-flight. A brief second. That was all the time the blonde delinquent had to look down and stare into the pair of glowing orbs of scarlet fury glaring back at her. Then, Tei slammed her into the ground. Wham! The rebellious blonde wheezed as the air was violently driven out of her lungs, her brain rattled by the impact. Had she been alive, Saki was sure she would have died just then. Tei lifted her sister again as if the blonde weighed nothing, easy raising her up into the air. And then she slammed her into the ground again. Wham! And again. Wham! And again. Wham! Pausing, Tei pulled her captive in just enough to look into her eyes. Dazed maroon met burning scarlet. Seeing that Saki was still functional, the Ravenette lifted her back into the air. Wham! Wham! With a final huff, Tei let go of the blonde ragdoll and returned to staring through the gym's concrete wall. Nah! Lily stepped over to the small crater where her elder sister had left her blonde one. Saki laid in the center of the shattered ground like a broken marionette, wide eyes staring into the sky. Lily wouldn't exactly call Blondie puny, the Bluinette said as the beaten delinquent whimpered much like a balloon leaking air. But Lily would agree that Blondie shouldn't have started that. When the school day ended and Izuku came to pick the trio up, Saki would insist that while hungry, she had only tripped, and would refuse to explain the origin of the new craters behind the gymnasium. That night, Todoroki residence? Enji Todoroki, the pro-hero Endeavor, slowly set the phone in his hand on its rest. The impulse to crush the small device was overwhelming, but the man resisted. Barely. His target had proven more difficult to acquire than he'd initially expected. Looking back, the red-headed man had to admit he'd been foolish to assume a force like the despicable Azui family wouldn't make a move like this. After railing against society's hierarchy for so long, now of all times you aim for a quirk I will have? Endeavor growled into the ether. Hypocritical bitch. Discovering that his target already had a girlfriend meant little to the man. He had money, status, influence. And if those incentives failed? Well, there were other methods to getting what he wanted. It was the fact that the girlfriend was that damned Azui's daughter that made things unnecessarily complicated. Endeavor knew that frog woman, that cunt hiding in a lawyer's suit, was no doubt already whispering in the boy's ear. By now, his target was probably already poisoned against the idea of cooperating with him to create the ultimate quirk. More's the pity. It doesn't really matter. Endeavor mused, leaning back in his chair as he rotated around to stare out the bay window behind him. The pro-hero knew just what he'd do. He already had the perfect place in mind for where he'd be able to speak to his target, uninterrupted. Waiting until the sports festival would be better anyway. We'll talk, and then I'll get to see if the rumors of his combat potential are true. Unnoticed just outside the doors to the pro-hero's office, one Fuyumi Todoroki sat slumped against the floor, hands shaking at what she'd just overheard. Eavesdropping might not have been the most noble of pursuits, but the mostly Sylvette was glad she'd indulged the impulse tonight of all nights. The only daughter of the Todoroki family quietly scrambled for her phone, immediately opening her contacts as soon as she'd managed to weasel out the device from her pocket. Finding who she needed, Fuyumi began to desperately text. She hated herself for it, but the young woman knew she wasn't strong enough to defy her father like her brothers had, each in their own way. Instead, she'd had to suffer quietly, a weak bargaining chip that could only await a dismal fate. Then, one day, something stupid and irrational had come along and given her a spark of hope. Snowflake, I could use a drink. Snowflake, are you free? Snowflake, this weekend? She was alone, she was desperate, and Fuyumi could only pray that the one person she could turn to could forgive her for what she was about to ask. Omake, fiery poison spit. Accessing video records from user, Tsuzuku. Video 1. Opening. Opening sequence. 2 teenagers, 1 male and 1 female, look back at the camera. Izuku, hello? Tsuyu waves at the camera, her tongue sticking out in a rather cute way. Izuku, first I want to thank our Mexican friends for sending us all of this test material. Izuku waves his hands over a bowl full to the brim with an assortment of fresh-looking chili peppers. Tsuyu, it looks really expensive, and generous. Tsuyu looks at the peppers with curiosity. Izuku, as agreed in the forums, we'll upload the video evidence to the suggested public site. Hopefully this will serve as study material for others who want to do a little self-improvement on their quirks. Asterisk the 2 teens take a seat, the bowl between them. The girl patiently waits until the boy selects a couple peppers to start the test asterisk. Izuku, I think we have to start with these green friends, Jaljalop Japple. Izuku seems unable to read the name of the paper. Unseen camera person, jalapenos, boss. Tsuyu, how again? I don't think I've ever heard that word's pronunciation before. Izuku, jalapenos? That's how you say it? Unseen camera person, that's not it, but I don't think you'll get it quickly enough. Both teens seem confused, but shrug after a few seconds. Izuku, alright, we are meant to actually chew on these to get all the capsaicin. Are you ready? Izuku turns to the girl beside him, giving her a chance to back out. Tsuyu, I am. But, do you really need to do this with me? Izuku, yes. I'm not going to stand aside and let you suffer alone. The teens smile at each other, then look at the peppers in their hands with determination. Crunch. Asterisk the moment they bite into the chili peppers, both turn red. Tsuyu covers her mouth in a silent scream while Izuku stands and curses up a storm. The camera person begins to laugh hysterically off camera asterisk. Video 7? Opening. Asterisk Izuku and Tsuyu look at the small plate between them. It contains 2 cherry-like peppers, their orange coloration making them look quite cute. The teens look at them like they are live grenades asterisk. Tsuyu, these are the last ones? Izuku, yes, they are. Izuku is already sweating. Tsuyu, why are these ones last? These, Jabanana. Unseen camera person, habaneros. They're hardcore stuff. Izuku and Tsuyu look at the camera with worried expressions. Unseen camera person, no one will blame you if you chicken out. Izuku and Tsuyu look back at the chili peppers, and visibly gulp. The two take one each with shaky hands, and bite into them as carefully as possible. Izuku, motherfucker. Izuku jumps from his seat and tries to reach for a nearby gallon of milk. The jug is snatched by Tsuyu, who drinks from it as if her life depended on it. Unseen camera person, I can't believe you actually did it. What badasses. The camera shakes as the one holding it laughs at the desperate faces of the teens. Video 8. Opening. Izuku and Tsuyu appear in the camera, which is obviously being held at an angle by one of them. In the background, a blonde girl is kneeling while sobbing, shaking, and covering her eyes. Izuku, the test was a success. Tsuyu, thank you everyone. Now my quirk is even stronger, Karo. Girl on the floor, my eyes. My beautiful eyes. Izuku, we appreciate your support, and are truly grateful for the extra peppers you sent. Tsuyu, the bottled sauces are a little bit on the overkill side though, Karo. Girl on the floor, I'm not supposed to feel pain, why do I feel more pain now than I ever did my entire life? Izuku and Tsuyu smile and wave to the audience, ignoring the other girl. Video ends. Total views, 2 millions. 87% upvote rating. Best comment, an absolute legend. Worst comment, needs stronger sauce. And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed. Support the writer. Don't forget to like, sub and share.